Did you miss us, little lizard? One of them said with a sickening grin. Please, I don't have anything left to give, you said last time would be the end. Yeah, well, when the Snow Scale clan wants something they get it. And since you can't meet the payment, we get to torch your little store. One said mockingly. Unless of course you'd be willing to accept young Master Jetta's offer? Or. The leader, an ogre named Borkus, stared at me with burning lust in his eyes. My wife's been nagging the hell out of me lately, so if you do me a favor and strip right here I can relieve a little stress and we can all leave quiet and satisfied. Hearing his disgusting words, my eyes widened in horror and I felt sick to my stomach. I felt sick. I wanted to fight but I couldn't. Sar the novel, ir.at website on Google to access chapters of novels early and in the highest quality. If I shifted I could kill all of these bastards, but then what? I have no power to fight one of the clans led by a dragon lord. I haven't even evolved before. Anywhere I hid they would surely find me. And what about Mira? A life on the run is no life for a young girl like her to live. She shouldn't have to spend her life paying for my choices. As I prepared to remove my blouse I couldn't stop my hands from shaking. I'm so afraid. As I undid the first button, I smelled their foul odors, getting closer and closer. Why is this happening to me again? When Borkus finally stood in front of me, he ripped the rest of my shirt off and shoved me to the ground. I'm such a coward. Seeing him grin as he began to unbuckle his pants, I could endure no more before I finally let the tears fall. I want to die. Ring. As the bell on the door rang once again, I looked through teary eyes at the figure standing at the door. Lisa. Hearing the voice of Lady Layla fill my ears, I felt relieved and ashamed. I didn't want her to see me like this, but I was so glad she was here. Borkus, get the hell out of here and mind your own fucking business. Layla, husband. Exedra, I'm here my love, what do you need? Layla, why you said you wanted me to be more selfish with my desires so. Please kill these bastards and help my friend. As I watched Layla make her request on my behalf I realized how upset she really was. Her usual red eyes had changed to an illustrious gold, and every word she spoke she said through gritted teeth. What did that bitch just say? Borkus roared. Bang. As soon as the words left his mouth the pressure in the room became unbearable. Exeter's body was emitting a suffocating purple and red aura that made even breathing difficult. Every breath I took, I felt needles in my lungs. You actually fucking dare to speak to my wife that way? Exeter was shaking with an unfathomable rage. Given that we are the same species, I could vaguely sense his surface-level feelings. The chills it gave me made me want to run to another continent to hide, but even then I knew it still wouldn't be enough. His rage was as inescapable and endless as fate itself. By now, Borkus and his goons were on their knees struggling under the pressure of a noble dragon. Mercy. I'm sorry. It was an accident, please I have a family. Borkus looked like he was struggling to get out every word. I could see blood beginning to run from his ears and instantly knew whatever pressure he was feeling was at least 10 times worse than my own. We're sorry. Please let us go. One by one they all began to beg, yet Exedra only stared at them and sneered. What happened next is something I will never forget for as long as I live. You say you have a family? Exedra asked in an eerily calm voice. Why yes, I have a wife and 7 children. Exedra slowly raised his hand and held out a single finger. A small purple and black flame, about the size of a newborn's fist, materialized above his clawed finger. That flame. I can feel the heat coming off of it even from here. As soon as the flame appeared the room became noticeably warmer. Soon the flame split into 3 and rotated around his outstretched hand. Then after I'm done with you, I shall kill them as well and thoroughly eliminate all traces of you from existence. As soon as his words were finished, all 3 flames shot towards a target at an incredible speed. As soon as they made contact with the men, their entire bodies were engulfed in brilliant flames. Flush. Aerg. No please. Yaarg. They rolled around on the ground attempting to put the flames out, but it was to no avail. None of the wood in the shop or the books on the shelves caught fire either. It was then that I realized he was so in tune with his flame it would only burn exactly what he told it to burn. For a dragon as young as he to have that much control over his power was simply unthinkable. Their screaming lasted for only 10 seconds before they fell over, never to make a sound again, but I wish they suffered for longer. After a few more seconds, their bones, flesh, and clothes had all been reduced to individual piles of ash. Only then did the flames disappear and that stifling ore retracted. Even though it was over, Exedra still looked furious. He stared at the ashes on the ground as if he wanted them to come back to life so he could kill them again. I watched as Layla brought her hand to her husband's cheek and looked at him lovingly. It was as if the previous scene hadn't intimidated her in the slightest, and she was even more in love with him than she was before. "Thank you, my love." It was only after he heard her words that Exeter's eyes softened considerably and he gave his own faint smile before he nodded. Layla then turned her attention to me. She came forward and got down on one knee and attempted to cover my exposed upper body with her husband's long robe that he'd given her. "Are you all right?" she asked in a voice full of concern. For some reason, when I heard that question I couldn't lie. I didn't have the strength. So instead I said nothing, and just let my tears fall silently. Layla made a pained expression before she pulled me in for a hug, and for the first time in a long time, I let myself be weak as I cried on her shoulder. At some point Exedra had come beside us as well and rubbed my back in comfort as I continued to wail like a small child. 20 minutes later, when I had no more tears left to cry, Exedra asked me in a calm and solemn voice what was his name. "Borkus," I replied weakly. In response, he gave me a faint smile and patted my head warmly before he stood up suddenly and began to walk out of the store. I felt like I was much too old to be receiving head pats, but of course he left before I could tell him anything. "Layla, I'll be back shortly, keep her safe, okay?" he said without looking back. "Of course, husband." He didn't tell us where he was going, but he didn't need to. My mother and father used to say you can feel the aura of a man who keeps his word. Looking at Exeter's tattooed back disappear, I can finally say I understand exactly what they meant. General POV. It had been an hour since the horrible occurrence that was thwarted by the appearance of Layla and Exedra, and Lisa had yet to really recover from her shock. Exedra had come back after only 20 minutes, smelling of smoke and blood. Neither of the girls asked him what he'd done because they already knew and they weren't the least bit bothered by it. There was no need for a grand explanation, no need to feel guilty. In their world, the lives of the weak were held by the strong. To the inhuman races, survival of the fittest is the supreme law of the world. They had both seen things like this for as long as they'd been alive. That belief had slowly taken root in the mind of Exedra since he'd transmigrated, and was giving him the mental fortitude needed to survive in this world and achieve his goal. He took no joy in what he did, but he didn't feel like he made the wrong choice either. He only felt bad that those kids had such a piece of filth as a father, so he ended their lives quickly and painlessly. The youngest child was already 13, so it wasn't as if he was killing infants. While he noticed the ease at which he made the decision, it didn't scare him. He figured that nothing that has happened to him so far had hurt him unnecessarily, so he could probably trust in these new instincts of his. Despite that, he wouldn't make a habit out of what he'd done today. It had only turned out this way because that man actually dared to raise his voice at his wife and call her something other than her name. For his wives and mother, there was no line he wouldn't cross and no blood he wouldn't spill. Their honor would not be sullied under any circumstances, or the consequences for those involved would be apocalyptic. "Why, did you guys come back?" Lisa asked sheepishly. As soon as they heard the question, Exedra stared at his wife in amusement as she scratched her cheek in slight embarrassment. Well, I was coming back to buy those other 4 books I saw. I thought I could be satisfied with what I had, but I just couldn't help it." As she listened to the reason why she was saved, Lisa smiled in amusement at the words of the young girl in front of her. Who knew she'd be saved by her favorite customer's love of reading? "Tell you what, since you saved me, you're welcome to take any book like you like for free." "How could I do that, Lisa? I'd be more than happy to pay for them." Layla refused. "It's fine. I'll honestly be closing up the store soon anyway." "Eh? Why?" "Well." Lisa began to explain that the men from earlier had been extorting money from her for several months. Normally, she could have handled them on her own, but they belonged to the Snowscale clan, one of the 4 dragon clans that were led by a dragon lord. After she refused to spend a night with the young master of the clan, he sent those thugs to harass her every week, having her cough up more and more gold to prevent her shop from being destroyed. While he could have taken her by force, Jeddah is a sick bastard who enjoys breaking women mentally before he takes them to bed. When he heard she was a single mother, he immediately concocted the plan to have her offer herself up on a silver platter. Given that she did not come from a clan and was a lesser dragon, she naturally had no real power to fight. Now that those goons had been killed, it naturally wouldn't take them very long to come for her and investigate. Why didn't you tell me you were going through all of this? Layla was incredibly distraught. How could all of this be happening to her friend and she not even know about it? It's not your burden to carry, my lady. How could I trouble you with something like this? The kindness in Lisa's voice only made Layla feel worse. She was afraid she was going to lose a dear friend and be powerless to stop it. My wife, do you trust me? Hearing Exedra, who had been silent this whole time, suddenly speak, Layla was once again filled with confidence. Her husband could do anything and make anything happen, so what did she have to fear? Yes. She replied without hesitation. Exedra came forward and sat down so that he was eye to eye with Lisa. Would you be interested in marrying me? Eh? Lisa's brain immediately short-circuited. Was he really asking that? Was he really asking her? They just met today. Layla, on the other hand, quickly understood what her husband was getting at and was actually excited. That's perfect. You're a genius. Exedra still hadn't gotten used to being complimented, so he naturally showed signs of a small blush on his tan cheeks. As Lisa watched this scene, she became more certain of the choice she was about to make. I'm sorry, but I can't marry you. Exedra looked like he somewhat expected this. May I ask why? We just met today. And I have a child and I'm a great deal older than you. Exedra chuckled when he heard her reasoning before he looked her in the eye and began to explain. This wouldn't be a normal marriage. You'd be marrying me in name only, just for protection from those bastard ice dragons. You are by no means obligated to act like a wife with me, and you can even be placed in charge of all the books in the castle library. Lisa wanted to stop him, but Exedra wasn't done. As for you having a child, I do not mind. In the brief time I've known her, I've actually become sort of fond of her as well. I think she likes me too. She did say I was cool after all. Seeing the cheeky grin on Exedra's face, Lisa didn't know whether to laugh or cry. And as for the matter of your age? Exedra closed the distance between them so that he could have kissed her if he felt like it. He bent down and whispered in her ear so that only the two of them could hear. I'm quite attracted to older women. Lisa's face became as red as a tomato upon hearing the teasing words of the man in front of her. Since when were young men so shameless? Husband, do you mind if I speak to her alone? Of course not, call me when you need me, my love. With that, Exedra walked away towards the back of the store. When Exedra left, Layla and Lisa stared at each other for a moment before Lisa broke the silence. Why are you so okay with this? What do you mean? Layla tilted her head curiously. I mean, your husband just asked another woman to marry him. And you're not upset in the slightest. Lisa was absolutely baffled. Well, I'm probably okay with this only because it's you. If it were another woman, I would probably curse them in their sleep, or have Becca crush all their bones. Hearing the words coming from her usually passive friend's mouth, Lisa couldn't help but shudder when she realized she was deadly serious. What did he do to this girl to make her so crazy over him? Are you worried you will fall in love with him? Layla suddenly asked. Where did you get that idea? Lisa's blush had returned and it was even worse than before. I noticed the way you look at him. When we first came in, your eyes never left his face. Lisa wanted to say she was admiring his abs and chest too, and she'd even imagined what he had in his pants at one point, but she quickly realized that would hurt her case even more, so she chose to remain silent. He's a very good man. It's easy for women to fall for him, but he himself doesn't really seem to realize it. Lisa couldn't believe it. Dragons were prideful by nature, so humility was usually only present in lesser dragons as life had already pulled them from their pedestals. For a noble dragon to be humble, Lisa could only imagine the life he'd lived. Layla walked up to Lisa and gently took her hand. If you're worried about being disloyal to me, don't. You and Becca are the only women on this planet I wouldn't mind sharing my husband with. Lisa said nothing and continued to think. To be honest, she hadn't been able to get Exedra out of her mind since he'd shown up and saved her earlier. He was decisive, cruel, and overwhelmingly powerful. Her natural instincts were screaming out to her that he'd make the perfect mate. And her motherly instincts screamed that he would defend her and her daughter just the same way he'd defended his wife earlier. She wanted that. She wanted to be protected. She wanted her daughter to be protected. She was strong, of course. Even a lesser dragon is still a dragon. But sometimes being strong is exhausting. She wanted to be able to leave all her worries with someone she could trust just for once and not have to do everything all on her own with no one to cry to but her pillow. Not because she wanted to abandon her responsibilities, just because she simply needed help carrying them. Deep inside, she knew he would give her all that she needed and more even if they never shared a bed together. And that was why she was afraid. If he treated her like that when they were just married on paper, she thought she'd be greedy and want more. She'd want to really be his wife body and soul. In exchange for freeing her from her burdens and worries, she would offer her all to that man at the snap of his fingers. Would Layla not resent her for that? What would his other wife think? Would she truly be welcome in the castle as a lesser dragon? She had a lot to think about. POV, Exedra. I walked to the back of the store where more of the books were kept. When we left earlier, I was trying to leave as soon as possible in order to not make Lisa uncomfortable, so I didn't really look. It's unfortunate that there's no fantasy genre in this world. Anything close to it is just a myth or a fable. As I flipped through the rows of books, I finally got to the section where spells are located. Spell books aren't rare per se, the problem is the most useful ones are exceedingly difficult to understand. If you're studying a high-level spell, even if you possess the corresponding element, you could take weeks to learn to execute it properly. And if you don't have the same affinity as the spell you're studying, be prepared to spend a few months minimum trying to learn that spell. Witches are the only exception to this rule. They learn spells as easily as reading a simple recipe and can even teach others and drastically cut down their learning time. Although the fee they charge is beyond extortionate. As a result, most beings try to come up with their own spells, which produced crude results at best. As I browsed through the spell books Lisa had for sale, I realized she had quite a fair amount of offensive and defensive spells. Although I guess it's not surprising, since there is a dungeon nearby. I found a few dark element spells, and I realized this was quite a good find. Dark element spell books are usually found on the vampire and demon continents, as their percentage of those with the darkness affinity is fairly high. I picked up a spell book called Umbral Chains and sat down on the ground to read. It's a dark affinity spell that manipulates the shadows around the user to create chains that can be used to attack or restrain. One of my favorite superheroes from Earth used chains as his main weapon, so that probably factored a lot into my decision to pick up this book. While I wasn't expecting to finish it today, I figured I'd at least kill some time while the girls were talking. As I opened the first page, I got a message from my good friend's system. Spellbook detected. Would you like to learn this spell? I stared at the screen in front of me for a minute before I finally realized this wasn't a joke. Isn't this too much of a cheat? I thought amusedly. Yes. Almost instantly, I felt a headache invade my mind and the book began to glow with a white light. After about a minute, the headache faded and I had a new notification. Host's unique mana has altered the spell's properties. Spell, Umbral Chain, has evolved into Chaos Spell, Abyssal Chains. Evolved? I didn't realize spells could evolve too, but maybe it's something unique to me, or more specifically my system. As I closed my eyes to process the information I'd just learned, I realized this spell was really incomparable to its predecessor. For starters, even if I'd mastered the spell and had a large mana pool, the number of chains I could summon would only be a measly 20. My evolved spell, on the other hand. Not only did the number of chains not have a limit, but they were bigger, stronger, and allowed me to sap an enemy's strength and add it to my own or give it to someone else. It was even a permanent change. The downside? The mana cost is unbelievable. Even with a plentiful mana pool for my age and stage, I can only cast that spell and hold it for about 25 to 30 seconds. Depending on the strength of the target, of course. Any longer than that, my mana will absolutely run dry and I'll pass out. The spell will not regenerate my mana or my mental fatigue, so the absorption effect is sort of useless. Even with that massive drawback, this is still a monumental gain and I'm quite happy. As I turned my head to look at the stacks of spell books next to me, I felt a wild toothy smile break out across my face. It's been about 45 minutes since I started learning spells, and I can say this was a rather fruitful endeavor. Though the headaches accumulated with every spell I learned, so at the moment my brain feels like it got a lap dance from a hippo. I feel incredibly weary and tired, like I could drop at any second. Despite that, I look at my current stats in satisfaction. Exedra Draven. Race, Demonic Dragon, Hybrid. Status, exhausted. Level, 1. Age, 17. Times evolved, 0. Health, 16,000. Strength, 2,750. Endurance, 2,800. Agility, 2,800. Mana, 3,050. EXP 0/100. Affinities, Darkness, Fire. Skills, Infernal Flames LVL1, True Dragon Transformation, True Demonic Transformation, Pain Resistance LVL1, All Weapon Mastery LVL1, True Demonic Dragon, Locked. Spells, Abyssal Chains, Lightning Bane, Mana Manipulation, Hate Shield, Tempest Cutter, Frozen Hell, Mist Body, Glimpse of Oblivion, Gaia's Retribution. I'd only managed to learn 9 more spells before I had to stop due to fatigue. While I am satisfied with what I got, only one other spell managed to evolve. Chaos Spell, Glimpse of Oblivion. Description: trap the target in a mental prison where their senses and surroundings are subject to your whims. The otaku in me is overjoyed. This is basically just Itachi's Tsukuyomi. Originally, this was just a darkness affinity spell that let me paralyze an opponent for a few seconds by looking into their eyes. While this is a huge upgrade, learning this spell almost knocked me out cold. The mental strain from learning this spell was so intense, my nose had begun to bleed at one point. These are just intermediate level spells. Thinking about what would happen if I tried to learn an advanced or master level spell, I immediately shudder. My poor brain would probably turn into pudding. While dragon regeneration is absurdly high, I don't see myself being able to heal something like that easily. Suddenly, I sensed movement from behind me and turned to see my beautiful wife standing next to a very shy-looking Lisa. "Honey, did you read all of these?" Layla asked in surprise. "Yeah." I was trying my best not to show how tired I was, so I put on my best and widest smile and tried to perk up. "What happened? Did you get frustrated you couldn't understand any of them?" She giggled. No, I learned them all." "Pardon? Excuse me?" Lisa, who had been silent up until now, cried out in shock along with my wife. Well, it's not really like I can blame them. I guess it is hard to believe. I decided to say nothing and just show them. I held up the spell book for mana manipulation and showed it to the girls before I activated the spell. Mana manipulation is basically telekinesis, but instead of using brain power, you're manipulating the mana that exists in objects to move them without making contact. I lifted up the table next to me using mana manipulation and both of their mouths immediately dropped. Did you really learn all of these since you've been back here?" "Yeah, gave me quite a headache though. Even I can't learn spells this fast. This is on par with my mother," Layla said in utter shock. I guess I shouldn't be surprised, after all witches and magic do go hand in hand. Changing the topic, I asked the girls what they'd been talking about since I left. Instantly, Lisa was pulled forward by Layla like a bad influence best friend to stand in front of me.
I stood up to look her in the eye, and she looked back down at the floor where I was sitting. Is she that bothered by my proposal? I only asked because I have a personal vendetta against Jeddah, and I want him to be in as much anguish as possible until he dies. While Lisa is extremely attractive, I already have 2 beautiful wives that I'm more than happy with, so I don't want her to think I proposed this because I'm lusting after her. I would like to accept your proposal. Oh. I look at the women in the room and notice Layla has a look of satisfaction as if she were a businessman who successfully got through a risky deal. Lisa, on the other hand, is starting to worry me. Her pretty face is getting redder by the minute. Are you sure this is what you want? I ask curiously. This won't be a real marriage, of course, but you'll still technically be married to me. Why, yes. She seemed to notice her tone was making her declaration unconvincing, so in the next second, she shook her head furiously, and her next words were much more composed. I'm certain. I wish to marry you. She then bowed slightly before continuing. Please take care of Mira and I. After I heard that, I couldn't stop a smile from breaking out across my face. Even in this situation, she put her daughter before herself. I find such a thing truly admirable, and I'm liking Lisa more already. I think that even if Lisa and I never share a marital bed, we'll still end up being fast friends. Of course, I'll take care of the both of you. I nodded. Naturally, since Mira will be my daughter, I'll spoil her plenty. Next came the hardest challenge I'd ever faced since I came to this world. I'm not sure what happened, but Lisa began to look at me with this look of fervent desire, and I could smell a scent emanating from her that was so intoxicating. I immediately became erect, and my breathing was labored as I held onto the fringes of my sanity. Even when I was naked with both of my wives in the bath earlier, I didn't feel a temptation as great as this. I feel like I could fuck her for a month solid with nothing but a single water break separating us. Individual. Lisa is secreting mating pheromones, altering the host's mental state. Host is now in heat. Would the host like to dispel this effect? I know that I should, but I look again at Layla and Lisa, and I'm overcome with an incredible lust. Layla doesn't seem to understand what's going on, and is looking back and forth between us in confusion. I want them. I want to fuck them. I want to see the expressions they'll make when I come inside of them. I want to impregnate them.
I have to taste them.
There are mine. As I was about to reach for both of the beautiful women standing in front of me, I heard a sudden jarring noise.
Clang.
All three of us looked towards where the sound came from and saw little Mira standing there in an adorable bear onesie with a shocked expression on her face and her signature spoon on the floor. I immediately dispelled the effect of the pheromones and felt my body return to normal. Fuck, she didn't see what I was about to do to her mother, did she? Is it true? She asked sheepishly. I am Mira, is what true, dear? I could tell Lisa was embarrassed, and it was understandable given what her daughter had just witnessed. Is the cool man going to be my daddy? As soon as we heard her question, Layla smiled while Lisa and I breathed an immense sigh of relief. Lisa walked towards Mira and sat down in front of her. It's true, does that bother you? She asked her as gently as possible. Mira looked back and forth between the three of us before she ran up to me and hugged my leg. No way. I've never had a daddy before. As we all smiled at this tender scene, Mira looked at her mother and gave her another critical hit. Now Mama won't be lonely. This earned a snicker from Layla and I, and an embarrassed look from Lisa. Wait, no. Mira suddenly backed away from me and put on an upset expression before she folded her little arms across her chest. I won't accept you as my father unless you give me eyes like yours. Mira, you can't just dash, Lisa began. Okay. I said simply. Really? Mira looked so excited I swear I could see sparkles in her eyes. I gently kneeled in front of her and held out my hand. If you accept me as your father, I promise we can do the Amica ritual, so that you can have eyes like mine. The Amica ritual is a sacred rite for dragons. It allows us to share traits, abilities, and sometimes strength with someone we have deemed as a true friend and companion. While Myra's little body is much too small and frail to handle any of my strength or abilities, I should be able to give her eyes like mine just fine. Instead of taking my outstretched hand, Mira dove into my arms and gave me a surprisingly strong hug for a little dragon. Mira, Dad, Layla. Fufufu, I think that's a yes. Lisa, look at those two, he's spoiling her already. Exedra/Mira. Get used to it. Lisa just put on an exhausted expression before she gave up. Layla and I were preparing to leave and continue our date since it was still light outside. We were going to head back to her favorite bakery before heading to a weapon shop in preparation for the dungeon tomorrow. Lisa and Mira would spend the time packing up and preparing to move to the castle, and we'd take them with us when we were done. As we waved goodbye to the girls, I took a slightly longer glance at Lisa before we continued on our way. When I remembered what had transpired earlier, I realized there was no way I'd be able to keep my word. I have to make Lisa mine. Just remembering the way she stoked my desire makes me want to carry her to a bed immediately, but I put that out of my mind for now. So, what do you think of Lisa? Layla asked teasingly as we walked towards the bakery. She's very beautiful and charming. I didn't lie. More than me or Becca? Since my wife was in such a teasing mood, I decided to oblige her. I leaned over and whispered in her ear, I could ravage the three of you endlessly. Her face immediately turned red, but her small smile showed that she didn't hate the idea and was getting much more comfortable. As we walked along the road in silence hand in hand, I felt Layla's aura began to change. I looked at her only to see she had a complicated expression on her face. Before I could ask what was wrong, she spoke first. Can you teach me how you learn spells so fast? I didn't immediately answer her. Instead, I wanted to know where this was coming from. Why? She stopped walking, and so did I. She looked me in the eyes with a seriousness that I'd never seen before in her. I love that you want to protect and spoil me, she began. But having to ask you to save my friend just because I wasn't powerful enough to do it myself haunts me. I know that you want to help me, but I want to be strong on my own so that one day you won't have to. Hearing her words, I couldn't do anything but smile. I have a unique way of learning magic that I can't teach you, my dear. She immediately looked crestfallen, and seeing that look tugged at my heart relentlessly. But if you want to be stronger, I believe I know exactly how to help you. I just need you to trust me. Her eyes immediately regained their light, and she nodded furiously. Of course. I smiled and pulled her hand towards the bakery. This was a conversation we'd have to sit down for. POV, Lisa. After Exedra and Layla left, my daughter and I began packing for our migration to the castle. I haven't told Mira exactly where we were moving, only that it was somewhere much bigger than our current upstairs loft. I was still a bit worried about how my daughter and I would be treated inside the castle, but Exedra assured me everyone was very kind and no one would think less of us. Exedra. As I was silently folding clothes into a suitcase, I once again remembered the face of the handsome young man who so boldly proposed to me. Everything from his presence to his charisma and powerful aura had completely drawn me in. Just hearing the way he was so ready to accept Mira as his own was enough to set me off like that. I blushed furiously when I remembered my shameful behavior from earlier.
Of course I was attracted to his physical appearance and his power, but just seeing the way he was with Mira, nothing could have made me want him more. Hearing the determination and resolution in his smooth velvety voice, I was simply overwhelmed and began releasing pheromones almost instantly. What if he thinks I'm some kind of whore? Although, before Mira came in I could have sworn he was going to reach for me. I must have been seeing what I wanted to see. I once again shook my head furiously in an attempt to get my mind out of the gutter. We both agreed this isn't a real marriage, it's only a contractual one. He already has 2 young and incredibly beautiful wives. I'm sure I'm the only one thinking so hard about this. That's right, his other wife. I suddenly yelled. I just remembered the plan Layla had told me about to win over Lady Becca. Mira. Can you come help me really quickly? General POV. So, who is this? Becca's body was constantly releasing a menacing black aura as she stared at the beautiful mature woman standing in front of her. She'd been very bored and lonely all day waiting for Exedra to return, so when she heard they'd arrived home she activated her movement technique and rushed to meet them at the carriage. Before she could dive into her husband's arms and reacquaint his lips with hers, she noticed another unfamiliar woman standing next to her friend. This woman was naturally Lisa, who was looking back and forth between Becca and Exedra nervously. Exedra seemed not to notice his wife's incredibly unfriendly aura, and he said in a calm and friendly manner. This is Lisa. As of today, she is also my wife. After the words left his mouth, there was nothing but utter silence. The wind ceased to blow, the crickets no longer chirped, and the guards who were stationed by the castle door held their breath in shock. Suddenly. Bang! Becca's aura exploded and took the form of a pitch-black wolf with 3 eyes. With a crescent moon hanging above her head and her hair blowing chaotically in the wind, the woman truly looked like a ferocious death goddess. Only now did Exedra realize this might not go as smoothly as he'd hoped. Though can you blame him? He'd only seen Becca's cute sides before this. Slowly Becca turned her gaze to Layla, who'd been observing this development as if it were well within her expectations. It wasn't like she didn't understand Becca's anger. If she were in her position, she'd probably react the same way. I thought we agreed to keep other women away from him. Becca's voice was deep and menacing and contained none of her trademark cheerfulness. Layla sighed when she heard Becca's accusatory tone and said nothing. Instead she pushed forward a shaking Lisa who looked like she wanted to go home immediately. Luckily, Layla had prepared her for this. Lisa knew exactly what to do to get this irate hellhound to listen, she just had to muster up the courage to do it. She took a deep breath before she walked forward. My name is Lisa and I'm a lesser dragon. It's very nice to meet you, and I hope you will hear me out. She bowed deeply as she presented Becca with a basket, and when Becca sniffed the air, her fearsome aura disappeared entirely, but her scowl was still present. Slowly she opened the basket to reveal a sub-sandwich made with flame bear meat, assorted vegetables, and a pepper sauce. Seeing her favorite sandwich perfectly prepared like this caused her to falter slightly, but she soon resumed her oppressive and resolute stance. Or at least that's what she believed. Her tail was wagging fiercely, indicating how desperately she wanted that sandwich, to the 3 in front of her. You think I'm so simple I'll hand over my husband just for a sandwich? She growled. Now it was Exeter's turn to act as he reached inside of the opened carriage and pulled out a young girl. When Mira saw Becca, her eyes immediately lit up. She's so pretty. Is she my other new mommy? And mommy? Pretty? Becca stammered. Yes, she is. This is my wonderful wife Becca, would you like to say hi? Exedra was such a natural with Mira, a stranger would believe she was his blood-related child. Yeah. Exedra placed Mira on the ground and she ran over to hug the leg of the still-stunned hellhound woman. Hello Mommy Becca. Myra's name is Mira. Becca's body trembled slightly upon hearing the words of the young girl. For canine-type beast kin, the women have incredibly strong maternal instincts. They couldn't even leave abandoned animals on the side of the road without feeling guilty. So naturally faced with the cutest young girl she had ever seen, Becca could only react one way. Oh my god, how can anything be this cute? She scooped up Mira in her arms and began nuzzling her cheeks against hers. Hee, stop it tickles. Nope, you're much too cute for your own good, I could just eat you up. No, you can't eat Mira. As Exedra, Layla, and Lisa watched this scene, all three showed wide smiles on their faces. This was just too wholesome. After 10 minutes of playing and nuzzling, Becca finally remembered she was supposed to be mad, but the jig was already up. Knowing she couldn't possibly be mad with this adorable little girl in her arms, she heaved a big sigh before she snatched the sandwich basket from Lisa's hands and sat down cross-legged on the ground. Placing Mira in her lap, she then tore off a piece of the sandwich and handed it to her new daughter. Thank you Mommy Becca. Mira cried before she began eating. Kya. What nice manners you have, of course you're welcome my little princess. Hee. Seeing that the child on her lap was eating well, Becca began to tear into her sandwich as well, though not before she looked at the trio in front of her and said in a flat tone. Start talking. 15 minutes went by and Lisa had explained just about everything to Becca and the hellhound woman had listened to every word. Naturally, Lisa withheld some of the darker details since her daughter was present. At the end of the explanation, instead of Becca, Mira spoke first. So Daddy and Mommy aren't really married? No honey, we aren't. Lisa responded in a slightly bitter tone that did not escape Becca's ears. Why not? The young girl was on the verge of tears. Your mother's just joking my little bun, don't pay her any mind. Becca interjected. Really? Yes of course my dear, how could your mother say anything to hurt your sweet little feelings? Becca's eyes gleamed with a dangerous orange light as she stared at Lisa, seemingly daring her to continue her explanation. This sent shivers down the back of the dragoness and caused her to nod furiously in agreement. Mira thought for a moment before she nodded in understanding. Mommy's not funny. She puffed her cheeks out like a squirrel as she pouted. Becca once again giggled at the young girl's overwhelming cuteness. No, she isn't my sweet little honeybee. Although. Becca looked at the basket that the delicious sandwich was brought in and the cute little girl in her lap. Maybe she's not all bad. She whispered. The three grown-ups naturally heard her and smiled. Lisa's smile was the biggest of all as Layla's plan actually worked, leaving her with a weight off her shoulders and room to breathe. While she was still worried about how everyone in the castle would react, she naturally could recognize when to enjoy the small victories. Oh? Who do we have here? A new melodious voice suddenly sounded from behind the group. Yara had silently approached the group from the castle, and with her sudden appearance Lisa immediately began to sweat. If Exedra's aura as a demonic dragon was suffocating and fearsome, Yara's aura as a silver moon dragon was eerily cold and regal. Lisa didn't even feel like she was worthy to breathe the same air as her. As she stared at her majestic twin horns and serene purple eyes, Lisa couldn't help but think she embodied every aspect of the word royalty. Hey Mom. Exedra said casually. This is my new wife, Lisa. Lisa, noticing the spotlight was on her, bowed deeply before introducing herself. Good evening Princess Yara, I am Exedra's third wife Lisa Clearwing. It is truly an honor to make your acquaintance. Lisa had to dig her claws into her palms to prevent herself from stuttering, but the effect seems to have paid off in the end. Please raise your head dear, there is no need for such formalities when you're family. Just call me mother like the girls do. As you wish mother. She slowly returned to an upright posture and her nervousness returned with it. The most beautiful woman she'd ever seen was staring her directly in the face. Was she bothered by the fact that she was a lesser dragon? Contrary to Lisa's delusions, Yara hadn't been bothered at all by the fact that she was a lesser dragon and instead was focused on another fact. Has my son always liked older women? He'd never shown any signs before, so Yara was slightly bewildered. She didn't know that Exedra's love of older women came from his last life. Several thousand hours of pornography leave you with addictions like that. While Yara was contemplating having someone the same age as her call her mother, a little dragon was so transfixed with the beauty of the woman in front of her she subconsciously began walking towards her. So beautiful. Mira cooed. Yara hadn't noticed the little dragon when she was still in Becca's motherly embrace, and when she did her eyes immediately widened in surprise. Where did this little cutie come from? Ah, sorry mother, this is my daughter Mira. Daughter? It was a rare thing for Yara to lose her composure, but hearing Lisa's declaration it was simply unavoidable. As expected, she probably wants her son to be with someone who is still pure. Lisa had a crestfallen look on her face. Yara looked back and forth between her son, her new daughter, and the small child in front of her. When her gaze finally settled on her son, she asked the question that was burning in her heart. Am I a grandmother? POV, etc. Am I a grandmother? Yes. I said without hesitation. My mother was silently processing this information for several seconds. Then at a speed I could barely process, my mother scooped my daughter up in her arms and began hugging her so tight I thought she would crush her. I finally have a granddaughter, I've been waiting so long for this day. Suddenly she stopped squeezing Mira and looked at her with a playful gaze. Want to see something pretty? Yeah. Slowly, my mother's eyes began to glow white before she gave us a scene straight out of a Disney movie. Slowly, she held out her hand and generated several animal-shaped constructs made from moonlight. There were deer, fish, birds, and more all circling around us, moving as if they were alive. I had seen my mother's magic before so I wasn't that surprised, but still, it is as breathtaking as always. Becca, so pretty. Layla, how incredible. Lisa, I've never seen anything like this before. My wives were in shock as well, not that I can blame them. There is a reason why silver moon dragons were so highly revered before they went extinct. Only they were capable of creating a spectacle as beautiful as this, and then razing a city to the ground immediately after. They are as powerful as they are beautiful. This is amazing. Mira cried. She tried to touch a few of the animals, and when she did they would explode into shimmering moonlight, making her look like she was covered in glitter. Do you like it, my granddaughter? Yes, it's almost as pretty as grandmother. Foo, what a sweet mouth on this one, I love her already. Mira loves grandma too. As I watched this heartwarming scene, I turned to see Becca with a crestfallen look on her face. Slowly she made her way towards me and buried her face in my chest. Husband, she didn't even say she loved me yet. Ah, she's too cute sometimes. As she looked up at me with tears welling up in her eyes, she asked, do you think she's at a rebellious age already? I chuckled and began to stroke my wife's hair to calm her down. Subconsciously, I finally let out a sigh of relief, knowing she was no longer hostile to Lisa. I was still planning on making Lisa mine, and having all of my wives get along is of the utmost importance. Lisa. I silently gazed at her and remembered what happened earlier. Even though I've long since dispelled the effects, the urges haven't vanished yet. As I looked down at Becca, who was still upset over the closeness of Yara and Mira, I once again was struck by her incredible beauty and felt urges well inside of me. I knew that tonight I probably wouldn't be able to control myself when we were alone. Let's just hope I don't break her before our dungeon trip tomorrow. Trigger warning, sexual violence. In the snow-covered mountains north of Antares, there is a large ancient castle sitting on top of the highest mountain peak. Inside the ancient castle, ice and treasures line every corner of every hall. In one of these hallways a young snow wolf beast man was swearing profusely. That is because he was elected by his peers to inform young Master Jeddah that 3 of his personal underlings had gone missing and a certain toy he'd had his eyes on had been taken. Reaching his destination, he took several deep breaths before he knocked, preparing himself for what he'd see inside. He'd never actually been inside himself, but from the stories that had been told by some of the other castle workers, this room was the stuff of nightmares. After he composed himself, he knocked on the door a single time and waited. And waited. 5 minutes went by before the door creaked open and the inside was revealed. Like the rest of the castle, the room was incredibly luxurious and spacious, but that wouldn't be enough to make any sane person want to stay in there. There was blood and other unknown liquids coating the icy walls like some kind of disgusting avant-garde artwork, and given the natural enhanced sense of smell of beastkin races, the man naturally didn't have to think too hard about what they might be. Though that wasn't the worst part. There were 12 women in the room. They were from various races, though most of them were vampires and elves, as they were widely considered some of the most beautiful alongside dragons. Some were in the bed, but most were on the ground, shivering, or not moving at all. All of them were injured, ranging from bruises to claw marks or even a few broken bones. Without exception, they all had blood running from between their legs. Sitting in the bed with a woman's head between his legs, was a pale-skinned man with a well-defined body and long snow-white hair that came down to his feet. He had 2 curved horns on his head, and beautiful shiny white scales all over his body. His eyes were bright blue and contained an unfathomable coldness. "What do you want, Wolf?" Jeddah asked angrily. "Young master, Borkus, and his squad have been reported missing." The beast man spoke in a clear, concise tone that conveyed none of his nervousness. Jeddah was well known to become incredibly irate over the smallest of things, so it was better safe than sorry. "So he ran off, huh?" Jeddah reeled something into the mouth of the woman who was servicing him before he threw her to the side with the rest of his garbage before grabbing another by her hair and shoving her head down. None of the girls screamed or even cried. They all knew by now that doing that would bring a far worse result. The beastkin, seeing this, was incredibly sickened and disgusted. He had several daughters and 4 wives that he loved very much, and imagining one of them in this bastard's clutches made him want to kill him immediately. Though if he had the power for something like that, he wouldn't be a servant, would he? "No sir, we don't believe he ran off." His entire family was also found dead. This caused Jeddah to raise his brow slightly in surprise before he resumed a neutral expression. "Bastard must have pissed off someone in a bar again." "Well, no matter," he said after a small deliberation. "Get a new set of eyes on Lisa immediately and up her fees. I want that slut in my bed by the end of the month." The beastkin swallowed when he heard this, as this was the part he was worried the most about. "Lisa is gone, sir," he said after several deep breaths. For several seconds, nothing happened. There wasn't a scream, a spell lobed at him or anything. But the beastkin man known as Lemkil knew better than to trust in that. He blinked and Jeddah appeared in front of him and had his hand around his throat, lifting him into the air. "What do you mean she's gone?" Jeddah's roar shook the walls of the room and caused cracks to form along the walls. Jeddah's grip was naturally too tight for Lemkil to get so much as a word out. When he realized this, he flung the man in his grip into the furthest wall with all his strength, firmly planting him a few inches inside of it. Lemkil knew better than to faint, so he bit his tongue to keep himself away from the darkness that was quickly approaching him. The strength of a first stage is no joke after all, he thought bitterly. "Speak, worm." Jeddah was furious. Most dragons are treasure hoarders by nature. They live their extremely long lives, trying to satisfy their near-endless greed. Whether their vice is money, women, wine, or magic makes no difference. So naturally, faced with something he'd marked as his being taken, he was fuming. The air around him was quickly beginning to drop to sub-zero temperatures. She was seen getting into the royal carriage of Princess Yara. Lemkil managed to say through much effort. "Why would she be in that bitch's carriage? She's just a lesser insect." "We don't know, sir." "Useless." Jeddah roared in anger. He began to break things around his room for several minutes until he could finally calm down. "The princess, huh, come to think of it, father was invited to her castle for some event next week, correct?" "Yes, sir," Lemkil said. He'd finally dug himself out of the wall and looked to be fine, but if you looked closely you found a trickle of blood running from his mouth, an indication of internal damage. "Fuck. I was planning on leaving annoying things to him, but it looks like I'll be tagging along," he growled. "I'll get my toy back, by any means necessary." Lemkil wanted to say that Yara's status was considerably higher than his own, and if the woman was in her care then there was fuck all he could do about it. But he was a lot smarter than that, so he said nothing. Secretly, he was hoping for Jeddah to cause a scene with the king's favorite child so he'd be put down like the dog he is. Jeddah grabbed a vampire woman off the ground before he threw her into the bed. This information had greatly soiled his mood and his need to burn off some steam was too great. "Permission to leave, young master?" Lemkil asked. He didn't want to see what was going to happen next, so all he could do was offer the girl a silent prayer. "Granted." As Lemkil quickly walked to the door, he once again heard the voice of his young master calling out to him. "Wait, Wolf." "Yes, sir?" The ice dragon lifted the woman's head up by her hair so that he could get a good look at her face before he issued his next orders. This one has a father and a husband in the cells. Bring them both here so they can watch. When Lemkil heard the order, chills went down his spine and he gritted his teeth. This was too much. The woman naturally heard this, but she made no sound and showed no reaction other than a single crystalline tear sliding down her bruised cheek. By your order, young master. General POV. Upon finally entering the castle for the night, the group immediately split up. Yara took Mira to the kitchen to bake cookies, where she quickly stole the hearts of the chefs and maids on duty. The young girl was quickly amassing a fan club as well as a personal army, as the guards who saw her vowed silently never to let so much as her hair be harmed. Lisa was being escorted by Duke through the castle grounds and her new living quarters. Coincidentally, her room ended up being right down the hall from her husband's room. What if I hear them having sex? Lisa's face was flushed as dirty images of her new husband in bed with his wives crossed her mind. Would they let me join? Her eyes immediately gained a new intensity. Dragons have an extremely high libido, and naturally Lisa was not an exception. While on the outside, she was very mild-mannered and timid inwardly Lisa was. This is all his damn fault, who the hell told him to be so handsome and saying all those things, and... Lisa was getting more and more agitated as the seconds ticked by. She'd spent a few years completely celibate while raising her daughter and was completely fine. After a few initial months of struggle, she learned how to satisfy her urges herself. She was quite content to spend the remainder of her life that way while raising her daughter, but the sudden appearance of Exedra threw all of those delusions out the window. Meeting the most handsome man she'd ever seen had awakened the deepest desires she had and brought them out in full force. It was like waving a crack pipe in front of someone in recovery. I just want to yank his pants down and suck his dash. My lady? Are you all right? Duke suddenly asked. The sudden remembrance that she was not alone shocked Lisa back to reality and left her greatly embarrassed. Yes I am. You have this look of terrible hunger in your eyes, would you like to stop by the kitchen next? Why yes, that sounds wonderful. She answered quickly. Truthfully? She wasn't that hungry, but she had to stuff at least one hole on her body with something, or her new husband would end up raped before midnight. I wonder what they're doing right now. She thought before quickly shaking her head to rid herself of those thoughts. In Exeter's bedroom, contrary to the wild and steamy scene in Lisa's imagination, he and Layla had spent the last 20 minutes trying to coax Becca out of her anger. Even though she understood the circumstances behind it, her husband still brought home another woman. The only reason why she doesn't mind Layla is because they were already best friends before Exedra became intimate with them and Layla was actually his first wife so she couldn't complain. She sat on a chair in the corner of the room with her back away from them as she stared at a wall. Come on Becca, how long are you going to be mad? Layla asked for what felt like the 100th time. Till I'm ready to stop. Came her gruff reply. She heard movement behind her and turned to see her husband eyeing her with a mischievous grin. If you forgive us, I'll make it up to you however you want. He said in a seductive tone. Becca's resolve wavered for a fraction of a second before her bright orange eyes regained focus and she remembered why she was upset. Humph. She turned back around and resumed her game of counting sheep. It was then that Layla's eyes shone with a glint of realization and her face broke out in a beautifully evil grin that could captivate and terrify men everywhere. Husband. Her voice was soft and laced with pure seduction. She gently stroked her husband's cheek and looked deep into his eyes as she licked her lips. Since she won't forgive us, should we just have some fun without her tonight? If either of them were still paying attention, they would have noticed two black wolf ears twitching furiously before returning to normal. Think you'll bluff me? Dream on. Becca was confident her friend still wasn't completely ready to go all the way, so she remained in her seated position. Exedra's gaze turned serious at his wife's provocation. The effects of Lisa's pheromones still hadn't completely left his mind, and teasing him in his current state was akin to poking a bear. Are you sure? He asked warily. Layla said nothing and instead grabbed her husband by his robe and pulled him in for a forceful kiss. Initially, Exedra was too stunned to react to the sudden attack but responded in kind when he felt his wife's tongue invade his mouth. After they broke their kiss, between heavy breaths filled with desire, Layla managed to utter a sentence that sealed her fate. Stop asking questions, and just fuck me. Exedra obliged her and swiftly picked his wife up and carried her to the bed. They'll probably back out at any moment now, right? Becca was fighting hard to resist the urge to turn around, but it wasn't easy. Ultimately, the belief that her friend would still be too scared prevented her from giving in. Unbeknownst to the young hellhound woman, the day's events had a great effect on her friend's mind. Seeing her husband so willing to end the lives of 3 men at her whim and eliminating a man's entire lineage just because he offended her, erased any doubts she might have had before. And after he'd shared the secret of being able to see evolution conditions with her, she became even more certain. This was undoubtedly the man she wanted to give her body to. She was no longer doing this to make herself seem useful, she was doing it to express her immense love and gratitude. Exeter tossed his wife onto the bed before he began removing his own clothes whilst making eye contact with her. The sight of her husband's perfect tattooed body and his intense gaze threatened to overwhelm the young witch's mind, and she felt herself get wet almost immediately. As her husband crawled towards her with pure lust in his eyes, she became certain that if sex with him didn't break her mind, it would surely leave her addicted. POV, Becca. I had turned around in surprise after my ears heard the wet sound coming from behind me. I was greeted with the sight of my love above Layla with his clothes half off and his upper body exposed. He reached down and tore her dress off in a single move and left her gorgeous body in full view of the 2 of us. Fuck, I just wanted them to coddle me a little more. How'd it lead to this? Ah. Exeter wasted no time and quickly took one of Layla's perky nipples into his mouth. He began to suck and nibble on it expertly, earning cries of pleasure from Layla all throughout. While he was sucking her nipple, his hands weren't idle either, and they slowly worked their way downwards, towards her vagina. Her vagina was quite pretty and pink, with a lot of nectar leaking from it. Fuck, this is really hot. I felt my own body heating up more and more as I watched them. My nipples had become erect, my breathing ragged, and I became quite wet myself. When Exeter's fingers finally reached her vagina, I saw her whole body tremble. Slowly, he positioned his hand so that his middle finger was on the entrance to her vagina and his thumb was on her clit. He stopped sucking on her nipple and looked deeply into her eyes. She nodded slowly, and he shoved his finger in and began expertly rubbing her clit. Fuck yes. She was so wet already, there was almost no resistance. I couldn't see any traces of pain on her face either, just a pure sense of euphoria. Please give me more, I want it. She begged, and he obliged her, inserting another finger into her vagina and burying his face in her neck, where he began to bite and suck. Her screams only got louder and louder as her whole body shook. Her eyes were beginning to glaze over, and I could see she was close to coming, but I'm amazed she lasted this long. If it were me, I definitely would have squirted in half the time. Even when Exeter was touching only my clit, it was so stimulating I had to resist the urge to come right away. I had never felt like that when I was alone before. There is something about his touch that's so intoxicating. Just remembering it makes me incredibly wet and horny, but I have to stand firm. Wait, what was I mad about again? I'm coming. Suddenly, Layla's whole body shivered before she jerked her hips and squirted onto the bed and our husband's hand. The entire time she came, he never stopped moving his fingers, and Layla looked like she was going through the most delicious torture imaginable. I'm so jealous. As I looked at the dizzied state of Layla, I could only feel incredibly envious. She was breathing heavily, and I could see a mass of hickeys on her neck that made her look like she'd been marked up by a beast. Slowly he retracted his fingers from her vagina and brought it to his mouth to taste. His purple eye glowed brightly before a satisfied grin broke out across his face. Next he removed the last of his clothing, and I could now see his towering manhood standing fully erect. In my old tribe, nudity wasn't really frowned upon, so I've seen my fair share of male members, but my husband's is incomparable. It was at an impressive size even when he was flaccid, but now it looks as enticing as it does terrifying. It was as long and thick as a steel pole, yet as hard as diamond. As he positioned himself at Layla's entrance, I looked at her narrow vagina and was sure it wouldn't fit. As he began to push himself into her narrow entrance, Layla awoke from her drunken stupor and winced in pain. Even though she was incredibly wet, taking something that big for the first time was bound to hurt. Gravy dollar. She cried before a golden rune appeared on her vagina and her body loosened considerably. I didn't know a lot of spells, but I knew a basic dull pain spell when I heard one. They were really going to do it. They were really going to take each other's first, 'cause I was being stubborn. But I can't even be mad, because this is all making me so fucking horny. Son of a bitch. I stood up and removed my own clothes before I sat down with my legs spread open wide and began to masturbate. As I rubbed and teased my own clit furiously, I also began to pinch and pull my own nipple. This is good, but it's not enough. This won't even make me moan. While I was trying to give myself an orgasm, Exeter's breathing had become so heavy, it seemed like he'd just run a marathon. I could tell he was fighting hard not to let his nature run wild and attack her like a beast, but right now, he looked so attractive. Slowly he began to push himself inside of Layla, and her cries of pleasure filled up the room. Even when blood began to flow along with her nectar, she never stopped moaning. "S so big." She barely managed to utter those words before Exeter began to drill her mercilessly at a rapid pace. I began to hear growls coming from him instead of actual words, and I knew he'd lost out to his instincts. I was only amazed it took him so long. Layla's eyes gradually lost their focus, and her tongue fell out of her mouth, and I could tell the pleasure was overwhelming her. She had orgasm after orgasm. She continued to squirt at a rapid pace the entire time he was fucking her, but Exeter didn't look anywhere close to being done. I guess she must have ran out at some point, because after a while even when she came nothing else came out, her body would just shiver as her toes clenched uncontrollably and her moans reached a new high. I was so jealous. I still hadn't even come once. Frustrated, I jammed 2 fingers into my vagina and finally got a temporary feeling of pleasure, and a moan finally escaped my lips. Ah. Exeter suddenly stared at me as he continued to fuck Layla's brains out. He'd seemingly forgotten I was here, and my moan reminded him. I could feel his gaze burning intensely as he stared at my vagina, and I knew he wanted me to continue. I obliged him, and much to my surprise, I became incredibly sensitive. Just knowing he was looking at me made me so horny, I couldn't stand it. Swiftly, he picked up Layla and bent her over on the bed so that she was facing me, and I got a good look at her. Her silky black hair was a mess, her red eyes had long since lost their focus, and her face showed pure delight. She was briefly surprised by the change in position before Exeter once again began to fuck her harder than before, and she forgot where she was. Fuck. I can't stop coming, it's so good. Her body trembled as he thrust into her with reckless abandon, and she came yet again. The whole time, Exeter had his gaze drifting between the two of us, and it turned me on so much. I finally felt my orgasm building after several minutes. My fingers expertly working on my tight wet insides, my husband looking at me like a beast in heat, and seeing New York friend being ruthlessly fucked right in front of me was too much stimulation for me. "Husband, I'm coming for you," I whispered, but I knew he heard me. I began to hear his growls and grunts increasing in intensity, and I knew he was almost done too. Again, I am gonna break. Layla screamed. In perfect synchronization, we all came at the same time. Exeter drilled Layla with one last hard thrust before he unloaded deep in her womb. Fuck, I screamed as my orgasm was finally released and I squirted all over the floor in front of me. My body was shivering intensely, but not as bad as Layla's. It almost looked like she was having a seizure, but I knew she was just having a constant orgasm. Sound wasn't even coming out of her mouth anymore, she just made an expression as if she were in heaven. Slowly Exeter pulled out of her vagina and his thick semen spilled out onto the bed. "S so full," was the last thing Layla uttered before her body could no longer hold itself up and she passed out. Suddenly a wisp of purple mist left her body and entered Exeter's purple eye. What the hell was that? I asked confused, but I got no answer. Instead, Exeter walked towards me and I noticed he was still hard. My body shuddered in anticipation and I grew wetter with every step he took towards me. I knew he still wasn't fully in control and had lost out to his lust. Instead of being afraid, I was excited. I wanted the same treatment he gave Layla. Without waiting for a word from me, he grabbed me roughly by the hair and shoved his manhood into my mouth. As he forcefully shoved his erect manhood into my mouth, the sweet taste of Layla's juices, the metallic taste of her blood, and the saltiness of my husband's cum all began to stimulate my tongue. It was so delicious, I greedily wrapped my tongue around his member, searching for more to taste, but it proved to be an arduous task. His penis was so thick I thought my jaw would dislocate, and he was so long I hadn't even gotten half of it in my mouth. Suddenly, he firmly gripped the back of my head before he shoved himself deeply down my throat. MMF. He began to fuck my mouth at a rapid pace, and I felt tears well up in my eyes. It hurts. I couldn't breathe, and my throat was bulging as his dick went in and out. I loved every second. The rough way he was treating me, and the taste of him inside my mouth, made me incredibly wet. I knew when he was done with my mouth, he'd give my vagina the same treatment. It got easier as time went by. Eventually I started bobbing my head back and forth on my own to match his thrusts and using my tongue to stimulate his shaft. His eyes contained so much obsessive desire and love that it spurred me on even more, and I wanted to take him deeper. Suppressing the urge to gag and breathing through my nose, I took all of him in, and my lips were soon touching his pubic area, and he began to let out his own moans of satisfaction. The sweet sound of his groans in my ear gave me an extreme feeling of accomplishment as I let him use my throat like it was his own personal toy. I loved that feeling. I had long since dropped all resistance and let him use me as he pleased. I needed him to know I belonged to him. Even though it was painful, that actually made it so much sweeter. He continued to fuck my mouth deeper and wilder, until he let out one final groan before he came down my throat. I wanted to taste it, I thought, feeling a sense of loss. As he slowly removed his thick long member from my throat, I felt the cough I had been suppressing finally escape. As I doubled over from my coughing fit, I was eclipsed by a shadow standing over me. What I saw when I looked up terrified me as much as it aroused me. My husband stood before me, but his wings had popped out and deep black and red scales could be seen on his face and upper body. He was still just as hard as before and, no way, did it get bigger? He bent down and hooked his arms up under each of my legs before he lifted me up from the chair I was in. I frantically hung onto his neck to avoid falling, but I was anticipating what would come next. Instead of taking me to the bed where the still sleeping Layla lay, he pinned me up against the wall with nowhere to run. I looked down in the gap between us and saw that he was definitely bigger than before. He was positioned perfectly at my entrance, and with one thrust he would be inside me. Just the thought of it made my already overflowing juices leak onto the floor. Exodra. Before I could ask him to start out slow since this was my first time, he captured my lips with his and kissed me with a feral passion. His lips were soft and full, and the way he used his tongue inside my mouth made my mind go blank. Fuck. As we kissed passionately and I moaned into my husband's mouth, he thrust his hips a single time and plunged himself inside of me. In one smooth motion, he breached my entrance, tore my hymen, and struck against my womb. The intense pain and the overwhelming pleasure nearly broke my mind in half as I had the hardest orgasm of my life. Shit, I'm coming. I screamed and I felt myself thoroughly soak the floor and my husband's lower body as I lost control of myself. Did you come with just that, my love? I looked through blurred vision at my husband only to see him looking at me with amusement. His voice was much deeper and captivating than before, and just listening to it made my insides squirm. He seemed to be back in control of himself at least partially, and I wasn't certain what that meant for me next. It felt too good. I barely managed to say, "Oh? Does my sweet little Becca have a pain kink?" His voice again rang in my ears, but I could hardly hear him since he'd once again started moving his hips. I don't know. He wasn't even being fast or aggressive currently. He was slowly going in and out, allowing me to feel every inch, and I could feel my body slowly adjusting to accommodate his enormous size. It felt good, great even. But it wasn't exactly what I needed. After experiencing that sudden, piercing initial thrust, nothing else feels quite the same. I could feel myself building up, I just needed that little extra to send me over. I muttered. I can't hear you, my love. I looked deep into his twin-colored eyes as I desperately pleaded, please fuck me harder. He smiled a bright enchanting smile before he heeded my request and he rapidly thrust into me. I could feel him knocking on my womb harder and harder with every thrust. Even though I was slightly concerned he'd break me. I didn't want him to stop. Fuck yes. Just like that. Please don't stop. I moaned fervently. I'm sure I must have sounded like some mad raving beast or looked like a woman drunk on pleasure. In a sense, I guess I was. I could no longer hear anything or smell anything. All I could see was the enticing image of my husband's charming face as he fucked my brains out with a pleased look on his face. See coming. I'm coming, oh my fucking god, I'm coming. As I was reaching the peak of my orgasm, my husband swiftly dug his sharp claws into my ass cheeks. The sudden, sharp jolt of pain increased the intensity of my orgasm tenfold. My mind temporarily went blank and my body shook furiously before I went limp in my husband's embrace. The entire time I was having an orgasm, he never stopped thrusting. I love you so much. I thought as I stared at him. I wanted to say it out loud, but I wasn't even sure my voice was still working. He gave me one last final thrust before I felt him fill my womb. As my insides were filled completely with his children, he kissed me passionately. As our kiss broke and my head lazily flopped to the side, I could see Layla, who was now awake, masturbating furiously while she watched us. That was the best. I managed to tell him how much I enjoyed it before my body got tired and I blacked out. General POV. After Becca passed out, Exedra gingerly laid her down in the bed under the covers before he resumed sex with Layla. This pattern went on throughout the entire night. When one would faint from pleasure, almost as if by prior agreement, the other would wake up and receive the same treatment. Exedra showed no signs of exhaustion even after several hours. On the contrary, he looked full of energy and like he could keep going endlessly. After the 7th hour, when the sun was showing signs of rising, Exedra pulled out of the still spasming Layla to see that Becca showed no signs of waking up and her chest was steadily rising and falling. "HIA. I think I might have overdone it," he said as he looked at the state of his wives and then the room. There wasn't a surface or an item that wasn't wet or broken in some way. The bed was the worst of all, and it was covered in fluids from all three of them. I'm never going to be able to look our innocent little maids in the eye after they clean this, he thought with a sigh before he grabbed some tissues from the corner of his room that saw the least amount of damage. As he prepared to clean his wives up, he received some surprising messages from his system. Passive skill unbound, grandson of Igrat. Mission received. Conquer the dungeon of Black Winter. Rewards. Instant level up x10. 5,000 shop currency. 1 random lottery prize. Time limit. 48 hours. As he looked over the notifications that popped up in my vision, he cocked his brow in apparent confusion. System, what do you mean skill unbound? A skill that has been unbound is a bloodline trait that was formerly dormant in the host's body. It is not the same as your locked skill, True Demonic Dragon. Okay, do I have any other dormant skills? The system does not know. Sigh, of course it wouldn't be that easy. Well, how'd I get this one? Host performed an action that awoke the dormant magic in his bloodline. Show me the skill information. Cannot analyze skill. What the hell? Since when can my system not see something going on with my body? Why can't you see it? Host must be at least stage 3 before skill details can be revealed. The questions just kept piling up in his mind. I have to get stronger as quickly as possible. Unanswered questions made him nervous. He then turned his focus to the mission and its rewards and was mildly surprised. The Dungeon of Black Winter was a medium difficulty dungeon not far from the castle. It's a relatively small dungeon with only 15 floors. Despite that, the size and strength of the monsters are no joke. Whole parties of up to 70 have been almost completely wiped out, and he and Becca are going alone. Looks like something exciting will happen today. Exedra cleaned his wives up and tucked them into bed in the driest spots he could find before he looked out the balcony towards the horizon. He'd finally be starting my journey towards gaining power, and the thought left him strangely excited. He thought back a little on his old life and smiled bitterly. The difference was so great it was almost laughable. Come to think of it, am I 37? I thought with an incredulous expression. After he died as Carter, when Exedra's memories were uploaded, he lived through 17 years of his existence from his birth to the day he collapsed and gained his body. While 37 isn't really all that high a number for a race like dragons, the sudden realization that he was now a middle-aged man took the wind out of his sails a bit. Well, whatever. As he gazed at the sun rising slowly over the horizon, he felt like life in this strange world was only just beginning, but was nonetheless extremely excited for whatever was to come. POV, Exedra. This morning was eventful to say the very least. After last night's activities, both of my wives slept like beautiful little logs until 11. Normally this would have been fine, but little Mira wanted to make breakfast for her new mommies and daddy and was slightly sad when I told them they were exhausted from a very strenuous workout. My mother simply snickered like a 4th grader, and Lisa had a furious blush on her face. She's been looking at me funny all morning. I wonder if she heard us last night? She should have joined if she did. I thought before I quickly turned my thoughts to other places. Eventually, after Becca and Layla showed no signs of waking up anytime soon, I had to go and wake them up myself. Layla, no more, broke me. Becca, few more minutes, MMH, I can go again. I felt slightly guilty seeing this sight. Maybe I went too hard on them for our first time? I was eventually able to wake them up and assured them I wasn't going to do anything to them, though I couldn't tell if they were disappointed or relieved. I sent both the girls to the bath and finally let the maids in to clean my room. Even though I avoided making eye contact, I could still feel some intense gazes coming my way, so I left in a hurry. Eventually, I went out to the garden with my mother and Mira while I was waiting on Becca. Apparently, Lisa spends most of her time in the library, which doesn't really surprise me. I should pay her a visit as well when I have time. As I say with my mother and my daughter for tea, I once again brought up my father. Mom, did Dad ever speak about his family? She looked at me strangely before she answered. No, he didn't. Mom, I need to know. What kind of demon was Dad? She seemed to be slightly surprised by my questions, and at first I wasn't sure she'd answer. After a moment, a small blush crossed her face, before I understood why. He was an incubus. My expression immediately became one of surprise and then quickly disgust as I could see my mother's eyes get hazy like she was having fond memories. Maybe I shouldn't have asked. The thought of my parents bumping uglies is really ruining my morning. Putting that aside, I was greatly surprised my father was an incubus. They're extremely rare, and usually they aren't all that powerful and end up getting kidnapped and sold to rich women. The fact that my father was so powerful was either due to his blood being extremely pure or his evolutions. Based off the skill I'd gotten this morning, I'd say it's the former. Daddy, what's an incubus? I heard the cute little voice of Mira ask me a question I never wanted to hear in a million years. I pulled her into my lap and looked her deeply in her eyes. It's a type of monster you must always run away from. They're very icky and can make you sick. I put on my best spooky voice for added effect. Is it a scary monster? She asked sheepishly. I nodded furiously, yep, very scary. But for worry, your dad here can blow them all away. I said as I puffed out my chest to look powerful in front of my daughter, and the effect seems to have worked. Whoa. Daddy's strong. My mother rolled her eyes at our display before she resumed her normal expression. But why do you ask about Dash? Husband. My mother was interrupted by a frantic Becca running towards us. Her pitch-black skin glistened beautifully under the sun, and her long flowing hair blown by the wind made her look equally majestic. She wore glittering black armor that suited her wonderfully and gave her a ferocious and wild look. Across her back was a new giant warhammer I'd bought for her yesterday in preparation for the dungeon and as an apology for breaking her previous one in our spar. Mommy Becca, you look so cool. Mira rushed off my lap and ran to admire her new mother's badass set of armor. Aw, thank you, my little peach. She scooped Mira into her arms and began to plaster her face with kisses. Hello Becca, I'm glad to see you're awake. Mother said with a grin. Must have been quite the workout, huh? Becca's was briefly confused before her eyes glazed over as she remembered last night's events. The best. I don't think I'll ever be fully comfortable with talking about things like this in front of my mother, but given how open she and Becca are, I should probably start trying. Mother looked at me proudly before she began to laugh. Foo, you're your father's son, all right. I remember that look vividly. One time we were on a beach in the vampire continent and... Okay. Well, we gotta go now. I hurriedly cut her off before she gave me nightmares. Plus Mira was here too. What if she traumatized her? Becca and I hurriedly said our goodbyes before we immediately departed the castle. The dungeon was about 40 minutes away by carriage, so we decided to fly and save some time. I carried Becca in my arms like a princess and we flew off above the clouds. We'd been flying through the sky for about 20 minutes when Becca suddenly spoke. Hey, I've been meaning to ask, but aren't you more handsome today? Excuse me? I had no idea where this was coming from. I looked in the mirror this morning and I didn't look any differently. I didn't notice when you woke us up because I was so tired, but when I saw you again later I was so surprised that I would have jumped on you if you were alone. Is she just acting like this because she likes having sex with me? But now since we are alone I can show you just how attracted to you I am. She wore a mischievous smile that nearly made me give in, but I held firm. Come on Becca, we have to conquer the dungeon today. Then I should make sure you finish quickly, right? She whispered softly before she buried her face in my neck and licked me all the way up to my ear. This girl is really... And so, the trip that should have taken us 30 minutes, took an hour instead. I blame her. General POV. The Dungeon of Black Winter was located at the foot of a large mountain to the west of the castle. The opening looked like a large cavern with a glowing black portal at the entrance. Currently, there was no one around except for a few guards who were assigned to keep out certain unsavory visitors. The guards were making idle chit-chat and gambling while they were on duty. This was a medium difficulty dungeon and barely anyone comes here, so they could do stuff like this no problem. A party of about 60 entered earlier and there was a betting pool over how many of the members would come out alive. Those bastards were way too cocky. I'll bet 250 gold only 10 come out alive. 10? My, aren't we feeling generous today? I bet that hot girl used half of those guys as a meat shield. I'd let her use me too. This is why you're fucking single. Women can smell that desperation on you. Yep. He's right, Co. Fuck you guys, what do you know anyway? The group of guards all looked at each other and wondered if they should point out that they all had at least one wife, but seeing that their friend was getting upset, they elected not to comment. Whoosh. 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 Suddenly, 6 flashes of blue light appeared, and when they vanished, a person took its place. There were 5 men and 1 woman. All appeared to be humans with badly damaged armor and various injuries. While nothing appeared to be life-threatening, there were numerous cuts and bruises on each of them. Huh. I bet 6 or less. Pay up, fuckers. God damn it. Lucky son of a bitch. Shit, I'll be eating bread for the rest of the month. The adventurers who'd just come out naturally weren't paying much attention to the gambling of the guards behind them and were instead focusing on their own internal struggles. Damn it, Maki. What was the point of bringing a goddamn dual element mage if all you were going to do was be fucking useless? Hey. She tried her best, alright. You shut the fuck up, Jackson. All she's good for was a mediocre fuck and keeping a few low-level ice wolves away. What good is that if an 8-foot yeti comes to stomp our skulls in? We lost over 50 men. I'm getting real sick of you talking about her like that. Yeah. I tried my best, alright. They had artifacts that weakened my light and fire element, so I couldn't heal you guys or use any real firepower. The young blonde-haired woman with bright green eyes finally spoke up to defend herself. The one who seemed to be the leader of the group, a man known as Seker, didn't respond to Maki and instead looked at the young man fiercely defending her. Oi. Get a fucking grip. You think you're the only one in the guild she's sucking off? The other 2 men, who had been watching all of this with disinterested faces, suddenly started looking around as if they found all of the surrounding trees and dirt very interesting. What do you mean? The young man named Jackson asked warily. He was undoubtedly the youngest in the troop and the least talented, but he was smart and came from a prominent family in the human continent. Jay Jackson, don't listen to him, he's lying. Maki was visibly sweating now. Of course, as a rare dual-element mage she had a lot of influence and connections, but there were certain things she could only gain by marrying into a big family. Jackson was the perfect solution to her problems. He was well-mannered, so he wasn't overly forceful and could be manipulated easily. He also wasn't her type at all, so she was free of any sort of emotional attachment to him. Oh? Then I shouldn't know about those 3 moles on your left butt cheek, should I? Jackson's face immediately darkened. You've seen her naked? Me and half the guild, Prince Charming. Sekar sneered. Jay Jackson, Maki stammered. She had to save this operation no matter what. This was her true ticket into high society. Jackson didn't even look at Maki and instead turned towards the other 2 injured guys who had yet to say anything. Tristan? Kahal? They both looked at each other briefly before they turned towards him and nodded slightly. Jackson said nothing and instead stood up and winced in pain before he began hobbling away. Jackson, I can explain. Maki scrambled to get up and began to follow him, but Jackson raised a single hand to stop her. I can't believe I ever loved someone like you. His tone was incredibly cold and full of malice. I knew it, I should have proposed to Isabel instead. I just hope it isn't too late. He muttered the last part before he once again hobbled away. Isabel? That slutty bar owner? I'm leagues better than her. Pow. Jackson finally struck Maki with a blow to the face that sent her tumbling back to the ground. Keep her name out of your filthy mouth. Jackson began to kick and throw punches at the woman, incredibly infuriated that she had the nerve to call someone else a slut. Interestingly enough, the guards were not paying any attention to this scene, symbolizing that they were actually quite used to dramatic scenes like this. Whoosh! Suddenly, everyone present witnessed the sight of a man with 4 black wings on his back, descending from the sky with a woman in his arms. They landed directly in between the guards and the battered adventurers. The woman hopped out of the man's arms and stretched her body. "Ah, we finally made it. Would have taken less time if we didn't take that little detour, my love." The woman hearing this smiled brightly before she seductively walked towards the man with her tail wagging in the air. "Oh? Did my husband not enjoy our detour? You certainly sounded like you did." Instead of answering, the man wrapped his arm around the woman and pulled her close. "Of course I did," he said before he delivered her a passionate kiss that lasted a few seconds. The pair were naturally Becca and Exedra. The two had finally arrived at their destination after a rather explicit detour and immediately began to feed the people around them dog food. Everyone seeing this was naturally stunned. Who were these guys? The man was obviously a dragon, but why was he so damn handsome? Who is this strange beastkin woman? She's beautiful, but I've never seen a race like hers before. The reactions of all of the men present ranged from jealousy over Exedra's looks and the woman in his arms to questioning their own sexuality. Only the young blonde-haired woman Mika saw Exedra and immediately concocted a plan. When Maki saw Exedra, she immediately concocted a plan to make him hers. He was without a doubt the most handsome man she'd ever seen. Her inside squirmed just looking at his face, and when she stared into his red and purple eyes, she immediately felt herself get wet. This fascination only increased when she realized he was a dragon. She could even tell he was a noble one based off the quality of his clothes. Even though they were simple, the material looked incredibly soft and expensive. Was this not a divine opportunity? She'd just lost her fat sheep and been granted the opportunity to gain another. And this man was exactly her type. Tall, strong, and incredibly handsome. She wouldn't even mind if she had to be subservient to him. Noble dragons were also notoriously wealthy, so she was sure he could give her a life of luxury that was leagues above anything Jackson could have offered. As for the woman in his arms? She wasn't too worried about her. Whilst she was admittedly beautiful, Maki didn't believe her beauty was inferior to the strange beastkin woman in front of her. Dragons were also known to have enormous harems due to their high libido, so she was certain someone like her would be irresistible to him. She was a dual-element fire and light user with a generous bust and an ass that had never failed to captivate a man before. Maki smiled inwardly. The events leading up to this point had provided her the perfect opportunity to gain her future lover's sympathy. Weakly, she crawled towards the newcomers and put on her best wounded act. Luckily, other than the initial blow, Jackson hadn't managed to strike her face again, so she was certain she could captive him and elicit pity. Sensing movement, Exedra and Becca broke their kiss and turned to see a young woman crawling towards them. Exedra immediately narrowed his eyes when he noticed the woman was human. This was the first one he'd encountered since he'd come to this world, and she brought back some extremely unpleasant memories. "Help me," the woman meekly asked as she sat on her knees to look as pitiful as possible to them, while also giving Exedra a good view of her twin peaks that had miraculously remained undamaged. "You bitch. You dare act like a victim?" Jackson roared, and the other members of his group couldn't help but agree silently. Wasn't this too shameless? Only Sekar remained unsurprised. He knew as soon as he saw Exedra that Maki would try to get into his pants some kind of way. And since dragons were usually very lustful, he was sure she'd succeed. Exedra couldn't hear Jackson's outburst. Mentally he was far away back on Earth in his old body. Being bullied so badly, he'd go home and cut himself. Being so afraid to be in public, his hands would shake. Being neglected and abused by his supposed parents. He remembered all of it with a simple look into this woman's eyes. "Help you? Why should he?" Becca growled. The voice of his wife brought him back to the present, and he thanked her silently before returning his attention to the woman. That man assaulted me, for no reason." "Oh?" Becca focused her bright orange eyes on the man the woman was pointing to and observed him carefully. Even though he was red with rage, the man didn't seem like the abusive type to her. "It's none of our business," Exedra suddenly said before he took Becca's hand and began to walk away. While Exedra was undoubtedly kind, that was only towards people who he loved or those that worked in the castle. Those had been the only people he'd ever met in either of his lives who'd always treated him well and never requested anything of him. Unfortunately, life has left him much too scarred to be kind and positive towards every random stranger, much less a human. The woman's beauty? He was not swayed by it in the slightest. To him Becca, Lisa, and Layla were leagues above this insect crawling before him. Her eyes reminded him of everything he so desperately wanted to escape from. The greed and cunning in those eyes reminded him of the darkness that lurks within all human hearts. The women he had now? They were his world and he would not turn his gaze from them now or in the future. Becca was originally surprised by Exeter's cold nature instead of his usual warmth, but soon decided she liked this better. She liked being one of the only beings alive who'd get to experience the kindness of a man as great as her husband, and her tail wagged happily as she walked with him hand in hand towards the dungeon entrance. Maki was so enthralled by the velvety smooth voice of the man when he spoke that she didn't even realize what he said until he was already walking away. Wait, please don't go. What was happening? Why wasn't he attracted to her in the slightest? Doesn't every man want to save the damsel in distress? Much to her dismay, the pair continued walking. Maki gritted her teeth. She didn't want to do it like this, but she had very little choice at the moment. Please. I don't have much, but I can offer you my body. The pair immediately froze. Got you. I knew no man on this earth could resist my beauty. She thought inwardly, very pleased with herself. Damn it, you disgust me. He said with an exhausted sigh. Before she could ask what he meant, Becca moved in front of the woman so fast it looked like she teleported. She delivered a swift kick to the woman's chest and a sickening crack was heard throughout the entire clearing. Maki flew like a kite with its strings cut and crashed through several trees, before her body rolled to a stop a fair distance away. She lay on the ground, struggling to breathe, before she eventually passed out. Becca now looked furious. Her body was covered in her signature dark aura, and the presence it gave off sent chills down the spines of all the men present. Well, almost all of them. Exedra looked at the woman like she was the most perfect woman alive. Becca hated killing sentient beings. Her whole life she had never taken the life of an enemy outside of a hunt. And yet she delivered a kick to that woman that was so powerful she'd die in an hour or so if she wasn't healed in time. That was how mad she was that someone would actually dare to covet what belonged to her. She would protect it ferociously even from the gods themselves. Such feral love and devotion left Exedra incredibly touched. And more than a little horny. In either of his lives, who had loved him so much, they'd be willing to shatter their own beliefs and principles like that? Exedra didn't know it, but Maki had actually gotten off quite easy. If it were Layla, she would have made sure the woman stayed awake while she died in the most horrible pain imaginable. Even though she wasn't a very powerful witch, she was still a child of the Witch Queen, so killing a human who was already injured would be as easy as cracking her knuckles. Becca at least gave her the courtesy of dying in her sleep. Becca turned around and glared at Exeter fiercely. She walked towards him slowly and stared deeply into his eyes. You belong to Layla, Lisa, and I. No one else. She growled. Exeter couldn't help but smile faintly when he realized she was now including Lisa with her and Layla, an indication that she'd come to accept her. He wasn't sure exactly what changed, but he wasn't complaining either. Of course I do. He said with a smile. The people watching this scene were in utter shock. Just who the hell was this insane couple? After the pair gave the onlookers another serving of dog food, it was finally time to enter the dungeon. The guards on duty had long since hidden their gambling table and stood in a somewhat organized manner when they realized one of their visitors was a noble dragon. They were the rulers of this land, and the guards were much too afraid of being reported for slacking off. They had kids to feed and wives to take care of. Well, except for Ko. As the pair finally approached the guards, they straightened up even further before undergoing standard procedure. Good day to you too. Please show me your dungeon permit to be granted entry. Exedra said nothing and reached inside of his robe and pulled out a golden token with an emblem of a dragon on top of a mountain. The signature emblem of the royal family. They didn't even consider for a moment the token might be a forgery, because absolutely no one had the balls to masquerade as a member of the royal family and risk the wrath of the Dragon King himself. All of the guards immediately widened their eyes, before they all kneeled in unison. Please forgive us for not recognizing a member of the Draven royal family, the supreme overlords of the skies. Exedra and Becca looked at all of this with a neutral gaze before they walked past the kneeling guards for the gate. Sir, please, a moment if I may, a voice suddenly asked. Exedra stopped in his tracks and turned around to see a young orc guard with his hand raised and his head down. He didn't dare to meet Exedra's gaze. What do you want? I'm in quite a hurry, Exedra asked with clear irritation in his voice. The guards who heard this looked at Ko, who'd raised his hand and glared daggers at him. Bastard! Do you want to die before you even see a naked woman? They all thought in unison. It's just I'm concerned, my lord. Even though this is only a medium difficulty dungeon, you may be putting your life in danger if you enter with just the two of you. That group you dealt with earlier was originally a party of over 60, and they are all that's left. Exedra immediately sneered and his tone became ugly. You're concerned? How touching. But I find your comparison of me to mere humans to be incredibly insulting. Ko thought for sure he was going to die. People have been killed for much less when it came to insulting noble dragons, and he could only silently regret his choice to speak up as he kept his head down. Much to his surprise, Exedra didn't move to kill him, though Becca looked like she wanted to. How dare he compare her powerful and magnificent husband to insects? Exedra walked towards the portal and stopped just shy of entering it. I'll show you, my wife and I are more than enough. He then entered the portal and disappeared. Becca followed behind him, though not before giving an intense glare to the one who gave her husband that unflattering comparison, and they were both gone. This left the guards amongst themselves again, and everyone immediately glared daggers at the youngest member of the group. Ko. I'll fucking kill you. Bastard. You could have gotten us killed along with you. Eep. I'm sorry guys, I'm sorry. He screamed. Needless to say, Ko got a much-needed lesson from his seniors that day about proper protocol when royals are around. POV, Exedra. When I passed through the portal, the first thing that hit me was the cold. Then the darkness. I appeared to be in some sort of large cavern, surrounded by nothing but stone and ice. Suddenly, Becca appeared right next to me. She didn't seem to be bothered by the cold, and I knew since she was part demon like me, the darkness wouldn't bother her much either. Are you ready, husband? She asked with a warm smile on her face. She didn't seem to be too bothered by the fact that she'd basically just killed someone, or maybe it just hadn't hit her yet? Yeah, let's go. With that, we began our adventure deeper into the cave. We each pulled our weapons out of our storage rings and cautiously walked forward. While I couldn't sense anything, it was better to be safe than sorry. Notice, time given to conquer dungeon is now in effect. Less than 47 hours and 59 minutes remaining. I dismissed the surprise prompt for the system before I got another idea. This dungeon was a great chance to build my strength, so I wanted to be able to guide Becca in the direction that would help her most as well. I already had Layla working on procuring poisons while we were gone today, so this would be killing 3 birds with 1 stone. Show me Becca's evolution conditions. Becca Osa Draven. Evolution path, Tiango of the Black End and Eternal Void, Forbidden Species. First stage conditions. Take the life of 100 enemies. 0 out of 100. Visit the abyss and return with your soul intact. Awaken the void element. Tiango? I feel like I've heard of that one too, but I can't remember it. No, I'm starting to feel like something is purposely keeping me from remembering. It's unsettling to say the least. I began to read her evolution conditions, and my headache worsened considerably. While her first condition was relatively straightforward, I didn't understand anything about an abyss, but given how morbid it sounds, I think she has to almost die. I'm torn. Of course I want my wives to be as strong as possible, but having them face mortal danger purposely is a big no. But if I prevent it from happening, then aren't I just holding her back? I've never been in a relationship before, so I'm not even sure what the right decision is here. I sighed again internally before I looked at the third and final condition, and my eyes widened in shock. What the hell is this about the void element? The void element is the rarest and strangest element of all and hasn't appeared in the last 1,200 years. No one knows exactly what it can do, but stories are all wild and varied, each being more exaggerated than the last. The last person who held it was the Vampire King, but they say he died or vanished, and now his daughter leads the vampire race. I think Mom invited her to the party next week. Should I ask about it then? I'd met her a few times since my mother and her have such a good relationship they consider each other sisters and rivals, and yet I wasn't sure if it was too personal a question. No matter who is asked, Queen Audrina has never once answered a question about her father. After a while, people just stopped asking altogether. Though there were of course some who were more persistent than others, and came up missing. While I didn't think my aunt would kill her so-called favorite nephew, I couldn't say with certainty she wouldn't either. ROOAARR. Suddenly, a bone-chilling roar resounded from all around us, and Becca and I immediately halted our movement and looked forward. About 50 yards away from us, several large humanoid-like monsters were slowly approaching. They were horribly deformed with rotting gray skin. Their bodies had chunks of flesh missing, like they'd been eaten either by themselves or by other members of their race. Their faces were the stuff of nightmares and only contained black empty eyes and an overly large mouth filled with yellow teeth. Chenus, huh? Becca wore an exhausted expression. Not a fan? They give me the creeps. I chuckled at this before stepping forward and swinging my battle axe that was as tall as me over my shoulder. Leave them to me then. Before I could rush forward and clear the area, Becca grabbed my wrist and looked at me with her cheeks puffed out. I thought you weren't gonna treat me like I was frail. I realized my mistake, then nodded slowly. You're right. I'm sorry. She smiled wide before she pulled me backwards. Good, now you step back pretty boy and leave them to me. Becca walked forward and before I could say anything, she was already changing. Her body, that was already very well defined, exploded with muscles that were packed with power. Her teeth and claws lengthened and sharpened drastically. She grew to match my height and her waist-length black hair grew down to her knees. You know, I never understood the term muscle mommy in my last life, but now I have to admit. This is pretty hot. I wonder if she could keep that form up during sex. Awoo. Suddenly Becca let forth a fierce howl that shook the walls of the cave. She placed her hammer on the ground before leaping high in the air with her claws poised to strike. She landed in the center of the horde of beasts like a black meteor and sent out a pulse of dark energy on impact. Boom. Immediately after she landed, she dashed towards the monsters closest to her, who were still stunned by the energy she'd released, and with a single slash of her claws she decapitated 5 of the monsters and sent their heads rolling on the ground. Her claws easily ripped through the flesh of the monsters like they were made of paper. Umbral movement. With her movement technique activated along with her transformation, she became so fast even I was having a hard time keeping up with her. All I could see were black streaks flashing across the battlefield and chunks of flesh flying into the air. Originally, I was quite worried that due to the monster's humanoid appearance, Becca would have a harder time killing, but she seems to be doing just fine. Maybe it's because they don't bleed? They are technically dead after all. Heads rolled, limbs were ripped off, and the monsters' bodies dropped to the ground one by one. Grooah. With one last pain-fueled scream, a group of over 40 Chenus died in under 10 minutes. I never want to hear any of the guards complain about Becca being too rough on them again. She happily trounced up to me slightly sweaty, with her tail wagging behind her and a proud look on her face. So? How'd I do? Your wife's pretty awesome, right? She's so cute when she's like this. Should I tease her a little? I put on my best thinking expression before I spoke. It was alright I guess, a little slow though. Eh? You bully. Apologize. I'm 5 times faster in this form. She pouted. I put on an overly shocked expression. Why should I have to apologize? I saw slow, so I said slow. That ain't bullying, that's an astute observation. Her cheeks puffed out and she looked like she was on the verge of erupting when I finally couldn't hold it anymore and burst out laughing. Pfft, ha 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 ha. She seemed to finally realize I was joking when my laughter gave me away and immediately started attacking me with light punches that cracked a few ribs. After she finished assaulting me and I apologized for my bad joke, we continued walking throughout the first floor of the dungeon. Becca said she wanted to handle the first floor alone and I obliged her and spent the time admiring her overwhelming beauty and incredible battle prowess. I didn't know it then, but this started a competition between us to see who'd clear floors in the fastest time. While I was watching Becca decimate another pack of Chenus, I came to the conclusion that my own battle prowess was severely lacking. While my wish for mastery over all weapons was granted, that's not the same as mastery over combat. Becca's instincts, reactions, and technique all eclipsed my own by a wide margin. I'm starting to think the only reason I could beat her in our spar was due to my high stats and luck. I need experience. And a lot of it. Dungeons are good, but maybe a proper teacher would be good as well? Hey! Were you watching? Becca screamed, shaking me out of my thoughts. She was waving at me from atop a mountain of corpses and looked pretty pleased with herself. Though I could honestly understand why. The further we walked, the bigger and more numerous these things became, and she was still doing just fine. Of course, you were incredible. I smiled. She blew me a flirty kiss before she jumped down and continued walking. After a few more minutes, we found a huge wooden door with glowing blue runes inscribed on it. We'd finally hit the boss room of the first floor. Becca and I looked at each other and nodded. As soon as she opened the door, the glowing runes disappeared, and a terrible icy pressure descended upon our shoulders. Sitting on throne made of pure ice was a Shanu about 10 feet tall. Normally, Shanu wear no clothing and hold no weapons, but this one carried a large hatchet and wore rusty bronze armor that covered its disgusting misshapen body. It focused its beady black eyes on us and rose from its throne slowly. Grohh. With a loud sickening war cry, instead of rushing forward like most of its kind, it conjured spears of black ice in the air and shot them towards us. Becca leapt out of the way and began circling the beast, searching for a weak point. Hate shield. A red miasma left my body and gradually formed a sleek reflective surface before the spears struck against it and they bounced off harmlessly. Hate shield was a spell I'd learned in Lisa's old shop. It's a spell that doesn't utilize any particular affinity, and instead feeds off the rage of its user to create a barrier. It's most useful when in the hands of certain races and individuals with more explosive personalities. The angrier you are, the more firepower you can defend against. Despite its usefulness, not many attempt to learn it, as the belief that the best offense is a good defense doesn't seem to be very popular in this world. The boss seemed to recognize that I wasn't intending to move from my spot and instead turned its focus toward Becca, who was finally making her move. POV, Becca. Damn it. This thing doesn't have a single opening. If it were the same as the other grunts outside, I could have handled this easily, but I can tell at a glance that its flesh was much tougher than those small fry. I decided to say fuck it and just rush this thing head on. I stopped circling the beast and took a deep breath before I circulated mana in my legs and pushed forward at an incredible speed. I prepared to swing my hammer and crush this big bastard's knee and make him much easier to deal with, but the boss didn't seem to be too fazed at my new speed and swung his hatchet to counter my blow. Clang! When our weapons collided, the sheer force of the blow sent me skidding back several feet. With one collision, a shockwave was sent through my body that caused me immense pain, and it took everything I had not to cry out. My internal organs felt like they were on fire, and I could feel a thin trickle of blood running from the corner of my mouth. I looked towards the boss, and I could see that other than a large crack in his weapon, he didn't seem to be suffering nearly as much as I was. I knew right away this boss was too difficult for the current me to solo. Shit, is that my only option? I looked towards the entrance where my husband was still waiting, and despite his outwardly calm appearance, I could see the worry in his eyes from all the way over here. While I do have a way to beat this boss on my own, I haven't fully mastered it yet, and the side effects could be disastrous. Should I just ask him for help after all? I shook my head furiously as soon as the thought crossed my mind. I told him I didn't want him to see me as fragile, so how could I even think of asking him for help when I still have all my limbs intact? Maybe if I look cool enough, he'll actually praise me this time instead of bullying me. The mere thought out a smile on my face and erased all of my reservations. I dropped my hammer to the ground and closed my eyes to focus. Beast aspect. General POV. Suddenly, all the shadows in the room vibrated before they rushed toward Becca's feet, or more specifically, her shadow. Exedra and the Shanu boss were equally stunned by the chaotic nature they could feel emanating from those shadows, and the boss unconsciously stepped back. Becca's body slowly began to sink into the ground until it disappeared altogether. For almost a minute, there was utter silence. Exedra and the boss never took their eyes off the pool of shadows for a single second. They could feel Becca's aura that was rapidly growing in power and ferocity. Suddenly, a wall of shadow shot up from the ground, and the boss immediately took a fighting stance. When it fell, a huge black wolf with glowing orange eyes could finally be seen. She was about half the size of the boss, but despite that, her body emanated a pressure that promised absolute death. The boss felt the threat from this new beast and wanted to neutralize it immediately. With another strange battle cry, the Shanu sent forth a larger volley of ice spears that were double the size and strength of the previous amount. The spears shot forward, but Becca had yet to move from her spot. She opened her mouth wide, she let loose a fierce howl that shattered all of the ice in midair. Exedra observed all of this with a neutral gaze, and yet the small smile on his face made his sense of pride known. Finally making her move, Becca rushed forward and tackled the boss to the ground and began biting and clawing at his flesh. The hatchet shattered on impact when it met Becca's hardened fur and muscles, and its armor was being torn to shreds by her teeth and claws. More gashes and bite marks were accumulating on its body by the second, and it was easy to see the boss was losing vitality rapidly. The boss made a last-ditch effort to protect itself and get this beast off of it and began to coat its arms in a layer of thick ice to bolster its defenses and raised them to defend its vital points. Seeing she wasn't able to claw through as easily as before, Becca raised her paw and brought it down on the frozen arms of the Shanu and shattered them completely. Ruayat dash. In the midst of releasing a pain-filled roar, Becca lowered her head and clamped her jaws down on the neck of the enemy underneath her, effectively halting its screams and ending its life. Whoosh! A blue pillar of light appeared in front of the icy throne and left behind an ornate golden chest and a rune circle to take them to the second floor. Dungeon loot was always dropped when the boss monster was slain and could contain any number of rare items. The quality of dungeon loot that was given was based off the performance of the individual or individuals who cleared the floor. No one knew where exactly dungeon drops came from, but when they saw the rarity of some of the loot, they didn't care much either. They simply thanked their lucky stars for their fortune and prayed to the gods that their luck would be even better on the next floor. The widely accepted theory was that dungeon chests contained gifts from the gods who were entertained by the struggles of mortals. Very impressive, Becca. I knew you could handle it. Exedra had dropped his barrier and was walking towards his wife with a warm smile on his face. Becca suddenly raised her head from the corpse of the boss and focused her bright orange eyes on the presence she'd just noticed. Grrrr. Becca immediately took a defensive stance and bared her fangs at the unknown man in front of her. Exedra, seeing this, froze immediately. Does she not have full control? It was not uncommon for races capable of shapeshifting to lose out to their instincts if their transformation was a particularly powerful one. The problem was that this was an issue mostly seen in young children, and by adulthood they had complete control. Though for wolf-type beastkin, the full moon wiped all control away as if it never existed. A full moon was still 2 weeks away, so that meant Becca's lack of control was an internal issue. A frown crept onto Exedra's handsome face. He could see Becca's muscles twitching underneath her sleek black fur and knew she was going to attack him at any second. He didn't have any herbs to burn and put her to sleep or another enemy for her to tire herself out on, so he knew he'd have to restrain her without hurting her. Exedra took a deep breath before he said, "You'll have to forgive me for this, my love." Becca snarled again before she leaped forward to eat the chattering being in front of her. Abyssal chains. Exedra raided his hand towards Becca, and black chains surrounded by a red miasma shot out of his palm. The chains wrapped up Becca's body, immobilizing her, but she still showed no signs of regaining her sanity. She won't get mad at me for this, right? The chains thrummed with a red energy and began to rapidly drain Becca's until she could no longer stand on her own feet. Exedra could feel Becca's power flowing into him, and a very dark voice in the back of his mind was telling him to keep her power for himself, but he quickly shook it off. Eventually, Becca shrunk back down to her normal form. Did I win? The weakness in her voice reminded Exedra to return her siphoned power, and once the color in Becca's face returned, she started sounding like her usual self. I'm proud of you. Exedra lightly kissed her forehead and Becca wagged her tail happily with a small blush on her face. Want to take a look at your rewards? Exedra finally stood up after several minutes of explaining everything that happened after Becca used her transformation and made sure she was okay and could continue on. Yes. Becca quickly hopped up and rushed to open the chest containing her prizes. Exedra was glad to see she was feeling better as she spent several minutes apologizing for trying to eat her husband. Inside the chest were 2 return crystals, a set of black armor that was above her current set in quality, a few health potions and a strange black collar with a bronze skull on it. What's this? She held up the collar with an inquisitive look on her face. System, can you tell me what this is? Cerberus collar. Effect 1. Produce 2 clones of yourself. Effect 2. Increases power of darkness affinity by 50%. Oh. Exedra was really surprised. It'll let you make clones of yourself and increase the power of your darkness affinity. He took the collar from Becca and placed it around her neck. She giggled happily before she looked at the magic circle a few feet away from them. Ready for the second floor? Exedra's eyes gleamed with an intense light and a wide smile broke out across his face. Definitely. POV, Exedra. After another brief flash of light, we were once again in an icy cave surrounded by darkness. If it weren't for the metallic scent of blood assailing my nose, I'd think we were at the entrance again. Once I observed that Becca was right behind me, we began our journey into the second floor of the dungeon. We traveled in utter silence since Becca was slightly exhausted from her work on floor 1 and I wanted her to rest her mind and body on this floor as much as possible before we got to the third floor. Suddenly, the sound of low growls and claws scraping the floor entered my ears. A pack of ice wolves had appeared in front of us from the walls of the cave and was circling us like we were prey. Each of the wolves were the size of a horse, with glowing blue eyes and razor-sharp teeth. They looked like they were going to lunge for us at any second, but why would I let them move first? Gaia's retribution. As soon as my spell was activated, spears of earth shot up from the ground to pierce the legs and paws of the wolves, rendering them immobilized. While their yelps of pain filled the cavern, I took out a Khopesh-style sword from my storage ring and proceeded to behead all of the wolves in the blink of an eye. X10 beta snow wolves killed. 1000 SC gained. 1 alpha snow wolf killed. 200 SC gained. Host leveled up. Whoa. Becca was clapping proudly with an odd expression on her face that left me slightly embarrassed. System, what's SC? SC is shop currency. Oh, so I get currency for killing monsters? That makes me even more excited. As I looked at all the corpses of the beheaded wolves, a glint of disdain flashed in my eyes. At this rate I won't be able to learn much. This'll be way too easy. Lack of proper challenge for host has been acknowledged. Come again? Sending request to entity euro hashtag %yen$ at asterisk for an upgrade of dungeon difficulty or a suitable alternative. What the fuck? As if on cue, the ground beneath us began to shake furiously. What's going on? Becca, in a rare moment of nervousness, had instinctively come to my side and took my hand. I don't know, just hold on, okay? She nodded furiously as we waited for the ground to stop shaking. Suddenly, a blinding white light engulfed Becca and I, and we lost consciousness shortly after. What the fuck has that psychotic god done now? I can't believe Mother even allows this madness. As I was coming to, I heard the voice of an old man chattering on about something I could barely make sense of. Ugh, my head. I was still slightly groggy and delirious. I wasn't sure of exactly where I was, but I knew I was laid out on the ground. My eyes flashed open when a thought crossed my mind. Becca. I sat up and looked around in every direction. I appeared to be in an empty Roman-style Colosseum made entirely out of ice. Snow was lightly falling from above onto the sandy ground beneath me. Becca? Becca. My wife was nowhere to be found. My mind began to run at 1,000 miles a minute and I was so angry pressure was leaking off my body in waves, cracking the ground at my feet. System, what the hell did you do? System functions are currently unavailable. ROAR. Before I knew it, the angry roar of a dragon escaped my throat and shook the walls of the Colosseum. Can you shut up, you damn mistake? Your wife is fine, I just didn't bring her here. I spun around desperately looking for the one the voice belonged to and my eyes focused on a figure sitting at the very top of the Colosseum. He was weird. He wore elaborate golden robes that looked like something Duke would have picked out for me to wear, and where his head should have been was instead a snowflake. I couldn't focus on his weird fashion choices or fucked up face for now, so I just asked the burning questions in my mind. Where is she? What is this place? I roared. What an insufferable little mortal you are. The entity gave an exhausted sigh before he began to answer my questions. She is back at my dungeon, resting peacefully and free of danger. And this place, he raised his arms out and spoke in a tone filled with pride, this is your proving ground. I frowned upon hearing this. Who are you that I should have to prove anything to you? I'd like to tell you, but unfortunately an unevolved being like yourself hearing my name would turn your brain into pudding. Then send me back or say something fucking useful. Hearing my words, the snowflake man's voice suddenly became as cold as the harshest winter. Insufferable wretch. If I didn't know any better, I'd think you were their real grandchild. Before I could ask him what he meant, he snapped his fingers, and in front of me appeared 10 warriors made of ice. Each one carried a weapon and was almost 3 meters tall. Listen up, mortal, you find my dungeon to be lacking? Fine. I owe a favor to the one who brought you here anyway, and this will be a fun way to repay it. You are going to compete against 14 waves of warriors. If you survive, then I'll give you a very good reward and return you to your sleeping mate. As soon as he finished informing me of what was about to happen, the warriors moved to attack me with their weapons drawn. I hastily pulled out my khopesh again and took an elegant stance as I prepared for the inevitable clash. Do try not to die, I don't want to owe that damn psychopath any more favors, nor do I want to piss off that fucked up family of yours. The first 6 waves of warriors were relatively easy to bring down. But the 7th wave is where things got really complicated. Instead of being regular warriors in armor, the snowflake man changed them into werewolf warriors and doubled their numbers. They were bigger, faster, stronger, and twice as deadly. They would come at me as many as 4 at a time, leaving me virtually no room to breathe or make the slightest mistake. Honestly? My magic combined with my weaponry is the only reason I'm still upright. The ice these things were made of is special, so even my flames don't work. And this is only the 7th wave, I thought bitterly. Bang! I delivered a swift kick to one of the werewolves and sent it tumbling into another a fair distance away. I'd now taken down about half of these damn soldiers, but I still had more to go. I twirled my weapon in my hand before I rushed forward and began exchanging blows with another group of wolves. I'd been using my khopesh to gradually leave small wounds that accumulated over time, but things were growing dire. My mana was all but spent, and my mental fatigue was gradually accumulating. Slash. Damn it. I reflexively grew my wings and shot up into the air. One of the wolves finally got me and slashed its claws across my chest. As my blood flowed out of the wound, I became even more enraged at the absurdity of all of this. I couldn't even focus on the battle because I was too worried a dungeon monster would come across Becca while she was asleep and start nibbling on her. Oi, you fucking mistake. That's cheating. I heard Snowflake Man scream another one of his annoying taunts, but before I could retort, the gravity on my body increased drastically and I plummeted towards the ground. Bang. Damn it. Damn it. This is pathetic. I'm too weak. This is embarrassing. How laughable. As I sat there with both knees in the dirt, I looked forward to see the nightmarish ice sculptures had recovered and were closing in on me. I bitterly closed my eyes and waited for the final blow that never came. When I opened my eyes, I was floating in another black space. Honestly, I'm getting tired of waking up like this. You're pathetic. Suddenly, I hear a voice that's eerily familiar behind me. I turn around and I see, me. Well, old me. What is this? I sneered, showing my obvious disdain for this current situation. This is your intervention. The old me materialized a chair out of thin air and sat down. Look at you, giving up already. What the hell's wrong with you? Our parents used to beat us worse than this. I simply said nothing and continued to listen. Do you know what your problem is? My clone leaned back leisurely in his chair and stared at me pitifully. You don't know what you're fighting for. So what if your combat experience is lacking? So what if your flames don't work on them? So what if you're running out of mana? As long as you're still breathing, you still have a chance to end the battle on your own terms. It doesn't matter if it's not decisive, cool, or praiseworthy. Hearing those words, my anger began to reach a boiling point. He didn't stop talking and instead continued, for right now, all that matters is that you struggle. He looked at me seriously. You want to live? You want to become an abomination that strikes fear into the souls of others? Then struggle. Keep crawling forward until you can fly. He stood up and walked towards me. We are living out our wildest dreams in this world. You will not bring our weakness from our last life into our new one. Because the reason why we fight. He got so close to me, I could see that his eyes were not my own and instead just pools of black as empty as they were endless. Is so that we are never forced to live as we once did again. I agonized over his words for a long time. I realized he was right. Subconsciously, I was still treating this like some sort of game or story where I was the hero, and all victories would conveniently fall at my feet. Only now do I realize how foolish I've been. I am merely thankful that I realized this before I was in a truly dire situation. Just imagining a scenario where I could not protect my wives and daughter makes my blood boil. Do you finally get it? I said nothing and simply nodded. I will never end up on my knees again. When I opened my eyes again, the monsters were still rushing towards me, but I felt incomparably calm compared to my previous self. It was as if I was looking at puppies instead of wolfmen. That sense of hopelessness that assailed me before has vanished like dust in the breeze. Alright, let's be serious now. Skill, True Demonic Transformation, activated. All stats plus 10,000. General POV. Damn it, Sockless. Just what do you see in this brat anyway? The entity muttered as he watched Exeter fall to the ground. He could admit that while Exeter had potential as a warrior, it was not anything worth breaking the transcendental laws for. Good warriors were everywhere in this world, so why the hell did he go so far to find this particular soul? As he watched Exeter close his eyes while kneeling in the dirt, he scoffed even further. His will is weaker than I'd thought. Sad you did all of this for it to bear no fruit. He raised his hand to snap his fingers and dispel all of his soldiers when an ominous aura started to flow from Exeter's body. Slowly his wings cracked and twisted as they began to change shape and became longer with pitch-black feathers. His blood-red hair darkened even further and grew until long silky black hair was touching the floor. His tattoos began to glow with a red light across his entire body and added to the pressure of his new already overwhelming aura. He opened his twin-colored eyes and the entity was immediately taken aback. His eye that was formerly red was now a deep pitch black. Upon taking a closer look at the man's face, the entity frowned deeply. He's definitely that whore's grandchild. Even he, a god-level being, was not immune to the charm of Exedra in this transformation. He was created from two species who were widely regarded as the most beautiful in several realms, so naturally he was enchantingly handsome. The entity made a silent bow to keep this man away from his harem and his daughters. When Exeter's eyes opened, his aura that had been overflowing before, was quickly retracted and honed to a fine point. Outwardly he appeared to be deadly calm, yet his killing intent had evolved to such a level that it could not be sensed by anyone who wasn't stage 3 at least. Naturally, the entity could feel it. His killing intent was like a precisely honed knife that could slice with ease. Exeter looked around at the soldiers and stared blankly. The entity even wondered if his transformation was just for show and he was going to give up after all. Exeter pulled a spear with a serrated tip from his ring before he began to move. Instead of waiting for the soldiers to come to him, he instead pushed off the ground at a speed incomparable to before and thrust his spear into the chest of one of the werewolves. Boom. With a single thrust, he blew a giant hole in the beast and before it could even fall over, he was on to the next opponent. Exeter swung his blade with a new ferocity, he felled enemy after enemy with such ease it was unthinkable that these enemies had given him so much trouble before. He swung his spear in a methodical and yet elegant manner. Every blow dealt against a wolf promised death, and Exeter was so in tune with his weapon it was as if it was an extension of his own body. Boring, so boring. Even though he was in the middle of fierce combat, Exeter's bored expression never left his face. He didn't even need to use magic to win this fight anymore, he was relying on his weapon skills alone. Bang! After the final werewolf had its head separated from the rest of its body, Exeter turned to face the entity that watched the entire spectacle with great interest. For a being like him, he could see that Exeter's power hadn't just grown, his mental state seemed to have changed as well. It was as if he was a different person now. How is it possible for him to have such a dramatic change, the entity wondered, but then shook it out of his head quickly. He'd seen stranger things in his millennia-long existence after all. As he was about to snap his fingers to summon the 8th wave, the voice of Exedra interrupted him. I'm getting bored. I want to hurry up and go home. He elegantly twirled his spear in his hand before he pointed it at the entity whose name he still didn't know. Send all the remaining waves at once. If the entity's face could be seen, a malicious smile would be displayed across his face. Boy, do you know what it means to point your blade at a god? Without a change in his expression or posture, Exedra said in a cold voice, show me. Heh. The entity let out an unamused chuckle before he clapped his hands, and the arena began to fill up. Instead of simple warriors made of ice, beings of flesh and blood, began to materialize from thin air. Frost giants, ice wolves, yetis, Shanu, and even Yukiona, all creatures of ice and snow, rapidly filled up the arena and faced Exedra with menacing glares. This sight that would have forced ordinary warriors to cry out in despair was only enough to put a small smile on Exedra's face. This looks a bit more entertaining. Exedra placed his spear back inside his ring and took a deep breath. For a horde of over 100 monsters like this, magic was more than ideal for crowd control. With a loud roar, the Yeti, Shanu, and ice giants all rushed Exedra simultaneously. Though that was exactly as he was counting on. Abyssal chains. At Exedra's command, instead of the chains coming out of his outstretched palm, all of the shadows of the beasts rushing towards him suddenly released tendrils of pitch-black chains covered in red miasma. The chains thoroughly entrapped their victims and brought them to the ground. The shadows the chains were connected to then all began to melt into one, before they made a beeline directly for Exedra. When Exedra's shadow connected with the merged shadows of his attackers, he fought the urge to release the grunt of pleasure that threatened to leap out of his throat. The feeling of growing strong through feeding on others was terribly euphoric. Originally, he wasn't sure this would work. Just because his enemies looked more alive than before, didn't mean they actually were. His spell only worked on living targets, and if this hadn't worked, he would have needlessly left himself open. Though, with his newly enhanced speed and endurance, they still wouldn't have been able to kill him. What a nasty spell you have there. I've never seen anything like it. The entity muttered. Exedra naturally couldn't hear him as he was much too immersed in his rapidly increasing stats. Strength plus 200. Endurance plus 110. Health plus 170. Strength plus 140. Health plus 130. As numerous notifications flashed across Exedra's eyes, the other monsters finally made their move. The Yukiona were the first to launch their attack and sent volleys of ice magic towards the young dragon who was still in a trance. Huge spears of ice shot towards Exedra at a rapid speed and prepared to pierce his body. Tink. The sounds of the spears breaking against Exedra's scales filled the arena. He didn't even need to conjure a shield to protect himself. With his newly risen stats and buff from his transformation, magic like this was no longer enough to even scratch him. As the volleys of ice fell harmlessly to the ground, Exedra finally regained focus and locked his eyes onto the hordes of monsters looking at him with horror in their eyes. Lightning Bane. At Exedra's command, his entire body was enveloped in lightning and the air around him began to crackle with intensity. Lightning Bane was a spell Exedra did not expect to use anytime soon. Out of all the spells he'd learned that day in Lisa's shop, this one was undoubtedly the hardest on his physical body. While the mana cost wasn't too high, the danger lay in the toll it took on its user's physique. Lightning Bane was a spell that focused the element of electricity into the user's body to increase the user's speed and strength by a drastic amount. A first stage being would easily be able to contend with a second stage being if the spell was used correctly. While the spell was a huge gain, even Exedra's body was much too underdeveloped to handle this sudden and drastic increase in power. Even with his highly durable draconic body, channeling pure lightning into one's self could have extremely debilitating consequences if he held the power for even a moment too long. Without the lightning affinity, the drawbacks were simply far too big. Hence the spell's name, as it could literally be the bane of its user's existence. At least until Exedra generously received the health and endurance stats of the muscle-bound ice monsters. The sudden and drastic increase in those specific stats gave Exedra's body the durability he needed to use the spell freely, at least for 10 to 15 minutes. Exedra stretched as he felt lightning coursing through his body. He felt so powerful that the feeling of boredom he'd been gradually getting away from returned in full force, and a slight sense of irritation took its place. Did I just make this too easy? Grah! An alpha ice wolf leapt toward the electrified Exedra with its fangs bared. Noisy. Exedra flicked his finger and a bolt of lightning shot out and pierced the wolf right between its eyes and killed it instantly. The lightning bolt came out the back of the wolf's head and headed towards the pack of wolves right behind it. The lightning had a chain effect that pierced the foreheads of all the wolves and killed them before they could even let out a yelp. The entire pack of 12 was wiped out before the lightning lost power and disappeared. X11 beta snow wolves killed. 1,100 SC gained. 1 alpha snow wolf killed. 200 SC gained. Exedra looked at the finger he shot the lightning from and a smile threatened to break out across his face. Well, even if it's easy, I suppose it can still be fun. Whoosh. He disappeared from his position and reappeared in the center of the horde of monsters that had yet to be touched. He'd eliminated about 40% of the attacking force so far, and now it was time to wipe out the rest and go home. Exeter coated his claws with lightning and dashed forward. Slash. Bang. If Exeter's claws weren't enough to end their life with their sheer sharpness, the lingering electricity in their body would travel to their brains and overload them to cause an explosion. Thud. 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 Enemies were dropping dead left and right. Some had slashed necks, while the ones with tougher skin had minor cuts on their bodies with blood leaking from their eyes and noses. Of course they tried to put up a fight, but Exeter was too fast for them to follow. Exeter was killing them and collecting SC and experience points like there was no tomorrow. Even if God himself appeared in front of him and demanded he stop his harvest, he'd spit in his face and continue his slaughter. Host leveled up. Host leveled up. Yukiona killed. 350 SC gained. Frost Giant killed. 500 SC gained. Host leveled up. Exeter's face didn't show it, but he was in heaven. The slaughter of enemies coupled with the feeling of his body undergoing a level up was incredibly addictive, and he felt himself developing slight battle maniac tendencies. Thud. Only when the body of another ice wolf hit the ground did he realize he'd run out of enemies. Tisk. He clicked his teeth in frustration before he deactivated Lightning Bane and turned to look at the snowflake man in the stands above him. The entity was astounded. Exeter's battle sent chills down his spine. His spell that let him drain the life force and strength of his enemies and add it to his own was horribly efficient. Send me back. Exeter's cold voice snapped him out of his deep thought, and he stared at the young man in front of him. He was covered in blood, and yet he didn't have a single scratch on him. The wounds he'd received earlier had healed so well he didn't even look like he'd been injured in the first place. His eyes contained an unfathomable depth that even left an entity as old as he was feeling slightly on edge. While he knew that Exeter couldn't hurt him, his cold reptilian eyes said that he'd sacrifice everything just to try. Men like that are dangerous. Sure, that was quite the spectacle, young man. Exeter said nothing and simply let the entity continue to speak. I've been alive for a very, very long time. I've never seen anything like that chain spell you used. Is that a spell you created? Exeter chose not to respond. Rather than being offended, the entity seemed to like this answer even better. Smart kid. Exeter being powerful was one thing, but being tight-lipped about his trump cards greatly increased his chances of living a long life. Don't worry, I'll send you back to your lovely wife and give you an ample reward. Exeter nodded slightly in thanks. The entity waved his hand and Exeter was wrapped up in a blizzard before he disappeared from the arena. Carter, huh? I'll be watching you with great interest. The entity fell into deep thought after Exeter left. He'll surely be here in 100 years. I should forge a good relationship with him now then. Normally, higher beings detest mortals. But Exeter's potential was too high to ignore, and he couldn't kill him because he'd risk war with the one who brought him as well as face punishment by the transcendental laws. Remembering Exeter's chain spell again, the entity felt his body shiver uncontrollably. Jaldabaoth, just what did you do? When Exeter opened his eyes again, he was in a completely different space than the one he left from. He was now in a stone-lined room decorated with gold and littered with damaged weapons. In the center of the room, there was an ornate chest decorated with gems and precious metals. Next to the chest was a portal to transport them to the outside, and next to that was the sleeping Becca. Exeter was about to rush to check on his slumbering wife when the sound of her snoring lightly reached his ears. He smiled on his heart when he saw the adorable state of his fearsome wife and decided he'd let her sleep for a little bit longer. Hidden subquest: survive the trial of the entity %% #pound asterisk at $. Completed. 5,000 SC has been awarded. Your level has risen by 10. 1 random lottery draw available. Exeter was quite pleased with the fruits of his labor as his harvest had been incredibly abundant this time around. He turned his gaze to the chest that still lay unopened. Well, should I see if my luck keeps increasing? Exeter opened the chest and examined its contents. There were 3 items inside. The first was a pair of daggers with a blade that appeared to be a shard of frozen ice. The runes inscribed on the delicate-looking blades were emitting a constant stream of cold air. Analyze. Tears of Kion, legendary grade. Plus 2000 to all stats when wielded by someone with the ice element. Can be bound to its user. Unique weapon skill, Chillrend. My eyes immediately widened when I read the grade of this weapon. Weapons are divided into 7 grades of rarity and power. From weakest to strongest there is common, uncommon, rare, unique, legendary, false god, true god. Needless to say, anything above unique grade was incredibly difficult, if not impossible to obtain. When there was even the slightest rumor of someone having so much as a legendary grade weapon, entire parties of over 500,000 would run out and attempt to bring the priceless treasure back home. Becca's collar she received earlier is a unique grade item. Exedra could see how big the difference was from the buffs alone. He turned his gaze to the second item and was even more pleased than before. The second item was a golden sword with a curved blade and a bright blue gem in the hilt. Shoes Razor, legendary grade. Form change. Summon a blizzard. Plus 1000 all stats. Can be bound to its user. Form change, huh? Exedra picked up the sword and bit his lip to spill a bit of his blood on it. When Exedra's blood dropped onto the blade, something unexpected happened. A fierce wind began to blow around the two and only disappeared after several minutes. The entire time the wind was blowing, Exedra could feel a sort of connection forming between himself and the blade. Legendary grade weapon bound. Corrupted Shoes Razor. Corrupted? He wondered. Corrupted Shoes Razor, legendary grade. Form change. Summon a blizzard, a sea of hellfire, or a shroud of darkness. Plus 1500 all stats. Bound. Exedra was incredibly perplexed. Weapons weren't supposed to be corruptible or take on their owner's characteristics. Not legendary grade ones anyway. Exedra frowned deeply. It seemed like questions about who he was and what was special about him were piling up daily. He was going to need answers and fast. Chalking everything up to because I was transmigrated was no longer going to cut it. The unease he felt in his heart was steadily growing. But where should his search for answers begin? The information the system could give him was limited, and after he was forcibly taken somewhere earlier, he decided to rely on the system as little as possible. So where does he go from here? Change. Exedra watched as the sword in his hand changed to a large golden mace. He spent a few minutes changing his new weapon into various different forms. Eventually, he decided on having it take the form of a simple gold earring that he promptly equipped. Exedra then turned his focus to the third and final item in the chest and his eyes widened in shock. Husband? Becca had finally begun to stir from her sleep and immediately went looking for the man she loved. Upon seeing his wife's half-awake state, Exedra forgot all about the third item and instead focused on his attention on her. How are you, my love? I'm fine, but did we kill the boss already? Exedra immediately narrowed his eyes when he heard his wife's question. What boss? Becca turned her head to the side in a confused manner before a glint of realization shone in her eyes. Oh? Don't tell me the Yeti King hit you so hard you forgot? By now Exedra had gotten a general idea of what was going on, but he still couldn't believe it. Did the entity give her false memories? While he could agree some things were better left unsaid, the thought of someone poking around in his wife's mind left a bad taste in his mouth. This only increased the wariness he felt towards the system and beings like whoever created it. If only Exedra knew that the entity only altered Becca's memories because he felt it'd be easier and was trying to help. No good deed goes unpunished, as they say. Soon Exedra and Becca left the dungeon and immediately began to fly home. Even though Exedra felt like he'd only been gone a few hours at most, it was well into the night when they went outside. While Exedra soared through the air with his wife in his arms, he decided to sort through his gains from the arena challenge. Status: Exedra Draven. Race: Demonic Dragon, Hybrid. Status: Fine. Level: 24. Age: 17. Times evolved: 0. Health: 23,160. Strength: 5,750. Endurance: 5,800. Agility: 3,920. Mana: 3,220. EXP 746/2400. Affinities: Darkness, Fire. Skills: Infernal Flames LVL1, True Dragon Transformation, True Demonic Transformation, Pain Resistance LVL1, All Weapon Mastery LVL1, True Demonic Dragon, Locked, Grandson of Igrat. Spells: Abyssal Chains, Lightning Bane, Mana Manipulation, Hate Shield, Tempest Cutter, Frozen Hell, Mist Body, Glimpse of Oblivion, Gaia's Retribution. Total SC, 20,050. Bound Weapons, Corrupted Shoes Razor. Looks like I'll be doing a bit of shopping when I have the time. Just because he wouldn't rely on the system for certain information or to gain his strength, didn't mean he wouldn't accept its rewards. After they arrived at the castle, they were immediately told by the guards that little Mira wanted to see both of them as soon as they returned. So Exedra put his plans to go and check on Layla's progress on hold for a moment and walked with Becca arm in arm to the training grounds where Mira was supposed to be located. Becca was wagging her tail so happily she actually hit Exedra a few times. Training? Her daughter? Her husband? Those were all of her favorite things. If she could get her daughter to spar with her, then her husband to feed her and fuck her again afterwards, she believed she'd die peacefully with no regrets. He. Exedra naturally noticed the dopey smile on his wife's face and chose not to comment and just let her be happy. He wasn't quite the same after his mind broke in the Colosseum. While he still loved his wives and cherished them very much, there was a coldness inside that had finally been released. It was not directed at them per se, more so the world and himself. The way he was now, only his family would be able to elicit any kind of warmth from him. Becca of course noticed his change, but after observing him for a while, she felt no need to bring it up. In short, he was still the same, he just spoke less. But his eyes never left her. His eyes that had become so cold and lifeless were overflowing with warmth when he looked at her bright smile. He still treated her as tenderly as before and kissed her just as passionately, so she simply wrapped her tail around his waist to let him know she was there for him whenever he was ready to talk. Exedra naturally noticed this small gesture and leaned over to plant a small kiss of true appreciation on her forehead. He was in deep thought himself. Ever since he'd entered the castle, he'd noticed something strange in all of the women present. Some were gazing at him and quickly turning away when their eyes met, others were just blatantly staring. He couldn't understand it at first, but gradually he began to feel it. Their overflowing desire. After using his demonic transformation for the first time, his heritage as an incubus bloomed and his charm had exploded to nearly heaven-defying levels. Becca of course had noticed, and they spent a few extra minutes in the dungeon indulging before they left. While his outward appearance hadn't changed much, the incredibly seductive aura he exuded was almost too much for the women to bear. If he wanted, he could have all of the women in this castle in his bed tonight. And half of them had husbands. Reaching the training grounds, the first thing they noticed was little Mira standing next to the head of the castle guards. Hajuan was an extremely well-built man that bordered on looking like a freak of nature. He was very tall, with reddish-orange hair and bright yellow eyes with brown scales. Despite being a lesser dragon, Hajuan was highly respected by the noble dragons for his many years served as the king's right hand. Now he was retired and placed in the service of defending the king's favorite child. Did Mira do good, old man Hajuan? Mira was slightly sweaty, wearing a small training outfit and holding 2 wooden daggers. You did very well, little one. If only my own kid showed this much promise. Out in the city, 6 individuals took a small arrow to the heart. I wonder when Mommy Becca and Daddy will come back. Myra's voice was full of sadness as she looked down at the ground. Suddenly, a furry black bullet scooped her up faster than the eye could see and twirled her around in the air. I have returned, my sweet little butterfly, I'm sorry for making you wait. Becca's heart was in tatters. She actually put such a sorrowful expression on the face of her lovely daughter. She had to fix this with an unparalleled amount of snuggles. She'd nuzzle those cute cheeks until they fell off. Mommy Becca. You're home. Mira quickly squeezed her mother back when she realized it was her. Exedra silently stood back and appreciated this heartwarming scene. Mira noticed her father standing a bit further back and quickly held her arms out to reach for him. Daddy's here too. Yeah? Is Mommy not good enough? Becca's ears quickly drooped. Exedra suppressed a chuckle when he heard his wife. She's my daughter too, you know. Mira missed you both, she said as she lightly patted her mom's hair to cheer her up. Young master, I am glad to see you are in good health. Hajuan bowed deeply and put on a respectful tone. And you as well, Lady Becca. They in turn nodded respectfully back. "What are you guys doing out here?" Exedra asked as he lightly stroked Myra's head. Hajuin briefly paused when he heard the way Exedra sounded. Even when his young master was sickly, he never sounded as cold and distant as he did now. But he'd seen many things in his 1,000 years of life, so he quickly shook it off and responded. "Princess Mira wanted to learn how to use a weapon, my lord. Apparently she was inspired by the tale of your battle." Becca/Exedra, oh? They turned their heads in unison to their daughter, who wore a sheepish smile on her face. He. How'd she do?" Exedra asked. Hajuin briefly wondered if he was hallucinating what he'd heard earlier, because his tone was now much warmer than before. "She tried swords, bows, and spears earlier, but ultimately daggers suit her best because of her small and agile frame." Mira poked her chest out with pride and held her wooden daggers up in the air. "Mira is the deadliest of all. You certainly are, my little pea, your cuteness could kill. And no. Mira is a strong and scary dragon like Daddy." Exedra felt slightly warm inside when he heard what his daughter thought of him. Every worthwhile father wants their child to see them as strong and dependable after all. "Mira did good, so can I ask for a reward?" "Of course, my little sweetheart. Do you want to spar with mommy?" Becca asked eagerly. "Old man Hajuin told me if you asked that to tell you no mommy." "Yeah?" Hajuin quickly looked away like he'd found something really interesting in the dirt. Exedra chuckled lightly before he asked, "So what reward would my daughter like?" "Eyes." Mira cheered and pointed at her father. He nodded in understanding before he bit his finger to draw blood and began to draw a symbol on Myra's forehead. "Dono tibi, me verisim, particulum meme." At the end of Exedra's chant, Myra's body began to float and was enveloped in a bright purple light. Slowly Myra's eyes took on the same red and purple coloration as her father, and her hair became an illustrious silky black, the same color as her father's before his transformation. Finally, she grew a second obsidian black horn on her head. At the spell's end, she slowly floated back down to the ground. She took out a small locket with a mirror inside and examined her new appearance thoroughly. "So cool." She finally managed to say. "I look just like Daddy." She quickly rushed toward him and gave his legs the biggest squeeze she could muster. For the first time since they left the dungeon, Exedra's face showed a small smile. He quickly picked his daughter up and returned her hug. Becca was thoroughly entranced. She'd seen her husband smile numerous times before, but there was something about the way he smiled now that was just different. It was a smile full of appreciation and warmth that left her desperately wanting to see more. Exedra looked Mira in her eyes before speaking. "I gave you your eyes, but I do so to honor our prior agreement so you can ask me for something else." Mira thought so hard her parents could swear they saw smoke coming out of her little ears. "Mira doesn't know," was her final answer after much deliberation. Exedra nodded slightly before he pulled out a small item from his storage ring. "How about this then?" Becca, "I still can't believe it." Hajuin, "That's." Mira, "Ooh, shiny." The item the three of them were ogling over was the third reward from the dungeon, and it was undoubtedly the most precious thing he could have received. Sitting in Exedra's outstretched hand was a palm-sized white stone with a rune for ice inscribed on it. "This is an affinity stone, my daughter. It'll give you the power to generate and manipulate ice," he carefully explained. If Hajuin didn't bite his tongue to keep his mind alert, he would have fainted already. This was an extremely rare treasure that each of the continents would bleed for, and his young master was pulling it out and handing it over to a child like it was a mere lollipop? He desperately wanted to protest, yet when he started to speak, Exedra looked at him and he froze. Those eyes that were seemingly daring him to speak sent chills down his spine and prompted him to realize that his opinion would be entirely unwelcome. "Such a doting father, my king, he's just like you." Exedra had long planned something like this, but was simply waiting on the chance. Since he knew he could purchase affinity stones from the system shop, he planned to buy some for Mira and Lisa. Naturally, he knew that Lisa was worried about fitting in as a lesser dragon, and even though he would kill anyone who dared to belittle her, he didn't know if he could be there to step in and save her before damage was done. Although he had a plan for when he'd gift Lisa one, Mira getting one here was a fine opportunity. "Here, hold this." "Oh, it's cold." "Alright, now crush it." "Okay." Mira quickly heeded her father's words and crushed the stone with her tiny hands. The next second, cold air began to shoot out from the shards of rock and flowed into her. Hajuin and Becca held their breath in awe. They were literally witnessing the use of one of the rarest items in this world. They had to thoroughly engrave this piece of history into their minds. Eventually, Mira absorbed all of the essence, and the area became completely silent. "So, how do you feel, my little cub?" Becca asked delicately. Mira didn't respond and instead opened her mouth wide and released a blast of cold air into the sky that turned into a small shower of snow. Hajuan, incredible. Becca, my daughter is even more amazing now. Exedra, I'm glad everything worked out okay. Myra's eyes shone with a strange glint before she turned towards her father and said in an excited voice, "Thank you so much, Daddy. If you want Mira to kill someone, just tell me." Exedra was originally taken aback by his daughter's sudden bloodthirst, but when he remembered their first meeting, he realized that was pretty in line with her personality. The worry that he might be raising a tyrant never crossed his mind. Whether Mira grew up and wanted to be loved or feared, it would not change the fact that he was her father and he would love her all the same. Exedra focused a little bit on the aura of Mira, and he could now feel clearly the aura of a noble dragon. "It's my job to kill for you, my daughter, not the other way around. But Mira wants to kill things with her power." Despite the morbid nature of her words, the little girl's expression was quite sorrowful, as if she'd just been told she couldn't have cake for breakfast. Becca took this moment to swoop in and get some mother-daughter time. "Well, you can go hunting with me? What do you say?" Mira looked back and forth between Old Man Hajuan and her father before answering. It was as if she was trying to gauge if it was okay to go hunting with her battle-maniac mother. Seeing them both nod, she finally accepted with a bright smile on her face. "Yeah, let's go." Suddenly, Myra's eyes began to get heavy and her body began to go slightly limp. "So tired." "Well, you did do a lot today, Lady Mira. Even though we're dragons, proper rest is still necessary," Hajuan said before he bowed to the three of them and walked away. Becca quickly took Mira into her arms and carried her towards the baths. "I'll go get her ready for bed, husband, I'll see you later." After Exedra was left alone, his thoughts overtook him. The way Mira had gotten so sleepy out of the blue was strange. He wasn't sure if he was being overly paranoid or what, but it was certainly bothering him. "System, do you know anything?" Individual, Mira Clearwing, has had her fate forcibly altered by the host. As a result, she is undergoing alterations to her evolution conditions. Exedra relaxed only slightly when he heard the reason for her sudden drowsiness, but frowned again when he realized he was the only one to notice. Questions, so many questions. He sighed in his heart before he went to find Layla. Upon finding Layla in their bedroom, Exedra was going to ask how her day went and if she had any issues with her conditions, but Layla had more pressing concerns. "Take your pants off." As soon as she saw her husband with his new aura of seductiveness, all weariness she felt from her day disappeared as if it were never there, and she only had one thing on her mind. Exedra could feel the desire radiating off of Layla like a furnace and quickly obliged her. He lifted her up and then tossed her onto the bed before he began to remove his own clothes as he climbed on top of her. Exedra would not let her go until he was thoroughly satisfied. And when it came to his wives, he was a greedy man who was not satisfied easily. 4 hours later. Exedra was once again admiring the sight of his wives completely naked and covered in bite marks and a mix of their liquids and his. About an hour after Exedra and Layla began, Becca came and promptly proceeded to strip and join. As Exedra looked at his wives, who were thoroughly exhausted from pleasure, he felt slightly guilty. With his heritage as an incubus blooming, Exedra was now unrivaled in the act of lovemaking. He could literally see each of his wife's weak points, imbue an incredibly pleasant sensation into the women just by touching them, and even increase the strength and duration of their orgasms. Even without his new powers, because he'd taken the time to learn his wife's bodies, making them orgasm was almost as easy as breathing for him. I wanted to tell her about her task, but I won't get anything out of her like this. Exedra regretfully looked down at Layla, who was undoubtedly worse off than Becca. Exedra got to focus on her for an entire hour alone before Becca even showed up, and her mind almost broke several times. Exedra calmly pulled a blanket over his naked and shivering wives before he asked the system to see the progress of Layla's evolution conditions. Layla is on Draven. Evolution path, mother of Jormungandr. Unique species. First stage conditions. Ingest 100 different kinds of poison, 100 complete. Gain a serpent-type familiar. Take revenge on a being who's wronged you. So she managed it after all. It took some convincing for Duke to order so much poison, but ultimately, because he was certain Layla wasn't going to harm anyone inside the castle, he procured the items she needed with speed and efficiency. I'll ask her for more details in the morning. Exeter thought before he began to get dressed to head to the castle library. In his battle in the Colosseum, Exeter realized the importance of spells as well as his weaponry, so he was going to sort through the spell books in the library to see if he could find anything useful, or better yet a spell that he could evolve. It didn't make sense to have all of these resources, and not make use of them after all. Reaching his destination, Exeter quickly picked up a variety of spell books before he sat down at a table by the window. The library was incredibly spacious and beautiful, with rows of books both ancient and new lining every corner. The large glass window Exeter sat next to provided a gentle view of the surrounding mountains and even the town below. Exeter felt the most comfortable in this place. It reminded him of the days he'd spent reading without a care in the world well into the night. With an imperceptible smile on the corner of his lips, Exeter picked up the first book. Spellbook detected. Would you like to learn this spell? POV, Exeter. After I put down the final book, I finally clutched my head in an attempt to calm this raging headache. I decided to push myself and learn at least 15 spells this time, but unfortunately, I was only able to learn 4 before my head felt like it would split apart. Chaos Spell, Soul-Breaking Scythe. Description: summon an ethereal scythe to deal damage directly to an opponent's soul. Chaos Spell, Abyss Hounds. Description: summon up to 3 hounds from the abyss and use them to carry out orders. Chaos Spell, Seducer's Hymn. Description: imbue magic into your voice to make weaker beings more likely to obey your commands. Chaos Spell, Sinister Burial. Description: give shadows mass and crush enemies under a blanket of darkness. Though all of those 4 spells evolved, I still couldn't be happy with this result. Is this all I amount to? I have to push harder. I need more power. I picked up a high-level spell book from the stack of books I'd selected and opened it. Spellbook detected. Would you like to learn this spell? Yes. Immediately, my head felt like it was being ripped open and force-fed information. The pain was excruciating, but I silently endured as the minutes went by. An eerily cold feeling suddenly pierced through my body. I looked around for the source of this uncomfortable feeling and my eyes settled on a shadowy corner in the center of the room. Sitting in a pool of shadows was a single yellow eye. Instinctively, I turned my head away. Something was screaming at me that looking for even a second longer would send my mind spiraling into madness. I felt its gaze on me for a while. I felt that I could hide nothing from it. I felt no hostile intention, so I made no move to guard myself or attack. After an unknown amount of time, the eye disappeared and the headache I felt left with it. Host has received the blessing of Malekith, the first Abyss King. Malekith has transferred to the host his original spell, the goal of all life is death. Host has gained a new affinity, death. Passive skill, Soul Sense LVL1, has been learned. I just barely managed to read the message from the system before I passed out. POV, Lisa. It was just before dawn when I got out of bed and prepared to go to the library. I wasn't normally up around this time, but I'd been having trouble sleeping tonight for some reason and I'd grown restless. As I walked through the dark empty halls towards the library, my thoughts drifted to my baby girl. When I went to check on her earlier tonight, she felt different somehow. It was as if she'd matured overnight. Then she muttered something about cookies in her sleep and I realized I was probably just overthinking. I noticed her new look as well, and I found my baby girl to be even more beautiful than before. It looks like she and Exeter finally did the ritual and she got the eyes she wished for, though I'm not exactly sure where the black hair came from. Creak. As I opened the door to the castle library, I headed directly for the narrative section and began to search for a romance novel I hadn't read yet. After I found a novel that I hadn't read yet, I quickly headed to my favorite spot to read in the library. Waiting for me at the table by the window was the man who was supposed to be my husband, and just the sight of him took my breath away. I don't know how it happened, but in the time since I'd last seen him, he appeared to have become even more handsome and I almost jumped on him. At some point, I realized he was asleep in his chair, and before I knew it, I was walking towards him. I told myself I was just going to wake him, but before I knew it, I was lightly stroking his face. I memorized every detail. The strength of his jawline, the softness of his skin, and the silkiness of his long red hair. To me, a more beautiful man did not exist. Without ever even looking at me with any lewd intent, this man had captured my attention thoroughly. He was sleeping so peacefully that I decided to take my book to my room and read there, but before I did, I wanted to make one selfish choice. I slowly tucked a strand of hair behind my ear and leaned down and softly kissed his lips. It lasted for only a second before I hurriedly pulled away. Just one kiss was enough to send my breathing into a spiral and make my body cry out for more, but somehow I held firm. With great difficulty, I turned around and left him to rest. Though, not before I draped a blanket over his body. As I walked towards the exit, I looked at the book in my hand and shook my head before I headed back to my room. I knew in my heart that instead of reading, I was going to spend the night masturbating again. POV, Exedra. Young master? A voice suddenly asked. Noisy. So noisy. Young master, are you all right? I slowly opened my eyes to see an old elven woman eyeing me with a concerned look in her eye. Bridget? I asked. Yes, young master, that's me, but why are you sleeping in my library? What? I looked around at my surroundings and realized I had indeed fallen asleep in the library. It was then that I remembered last night's events and remembered what happened in the first place. But how did this blanket get over me? I knew for sure I didn't grab it. Unknowingly, my hand went to my lips and I felt a warm feeling spread through my chest. I dismissed Bridget and informed her I was just studying some spells late and fell asleep. She simply asked me not to overwork myself just because I was healthy now. I put all of the books back and left the library. As I walked through the halls, I was replaying events from the night in my mind over and over again. The blessing from the first Abyss King, the sudden acquisition of the rare death element, and the new spell I acquired left me extremely perplexed. I wasn't even aware I could receive blessings, and I wasn't even sure what an Abyss King is. There is no knowledge of it in my memories, and I don't think it'd be in any books either. Show me what that blessing does. Blessing of Malekith, the first Abyss King. Plus 2000 all stats. Increased affinity with the night and all of its creatures. Additional buffs in places thick with death. While I was pleased with the added strength, I still was curious about the origin behind this new entity. Additionally, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't see the details of the spell I was given. It was as if the information was hiding deep within my subconscious. I knew I could use it, and I knew how to, I just didn't know what it would do. I decided for now, I wouldn't try to use it. The last thing I wanted was to test it at the training grounds and level the castle. I could feel it deep within my bones that the spell was terrifyingly powerful. Part of me was excited and looked forward to the future when I might finally get to use it. 1 week later. POV, Layla. Does anyone know why he called for us like this? Becca, nope. Lisa, sorry, no. Mira, maybe he has somebody he wants us to kill? I choked slightly when I heard my daughter's idea of what her father might be calling us for, and I wondered if her getting an affinity stone amplified her violent tendencies. Ahem, I don't think that's it, Mira. Early this morning, Exedra had called for all of us to meet him in the reception parlor for an unspecified reason. We tried to ask Mother what it was about, but she simply giggled and remarked over how it was nice to be young before walking away, leaving us all confused. So now we are walking to meet Exedra without knowing quite what is in store for us. Mira put her little hand on her chin and seemingly was thinking very hard about something before she reached another conclusion. Maybe he's going to give us cookies? Layla/Becca/Lisa, you just ate breakfast. So? Mira turned her head in confusion as if she truly did not understand why we weren't on our way to eat cookies. Well, knowing your father, I wouldn't be surprised if he had cookies prepared for you since he knows you're coming. I muttered. Yep. Lisa agreed. You're probably right now that I think about it. Becca said. Myra's eyes glimmered with excitement before her face broke out in a wide smile and she unfurled her wings from her back. Cookies. Like a little missile, she took off towards the room at the end of the hall where we were supposed to be meeting her father. Mira. No flying in the castle, Lisa cried, but it was to not avail. Her little wings are so cute. Becca wore the same pleased expression that she always had whenever Mira was involved. You all spoil her too much. Lisa pouted. Foo, give us a break, we've never had a daughter before and she's so cute, we just can't help it. I reasoned. But what if she becomes a tyrant one day, with no impulse control? Is that a problem? Becca and I asked in unison. What? I would still love her just the same. As would I. Becca nodded. Lisa seemed to realize that she was never going to win this battle in the first place, so she rolled her eyes and put on a dissatisfied expression. She could try and hide it all she wanted, but I've known Lisa for a very long time and I understand her well. That little glint in her eyes tells me that she's actually quite happy that others treasure her daughter as much as she does. Reaching our destination, the girls and I opened the door to witness a stunning scene. The parlor was filled with fine clothes, dresses, and jewelry of all kinds. Everything from the brightest gold to the most illustrious rubies and diamonds were laid out in front of us. Sitting on a couch in the center of the room was our husband with Mira in his lap, nibbling on a cookie. Next to him was a dwarven woman wearing formal business attire and smiling warmly at us. Lisa, wow. Becca, what is all this? Layla, who is this for? Exeter's face didn't show it, but his eyes contained a pleased expression that he couldn't hide. When he finally opened his mouth to speak, his words brought tears to my eyes. General POV. The party will be in 2 days. Your families will be in attendance. When Becca and Layla heard this, their bodies instinctively trembled. Even though they had grown up completely differently, the treatment they had received was the same. Becca was scorned from the moment she was born due to her fear of blood that stemmed from childhood and her subsequent unwillingness to kill. Layla was treated harshly because even though she was a daughter of the Witch Queen, her talent for magic was far behind her sisters and her animus element, though Rare only let her control snakes and take on some of their characteristics. The bullying both girls faced was intense and never-ending. After their clans used them as bargaining chips, they hadn't seen or heard from them again. Exeter knew and understood all too well the reason for his wife's state, and he quickly reassured them. They will not be left alone with you, and I will remain by your side at all times. The girls felt slightly reassured upon hearing this, but even still, they were nervous. This is Rudy. Exeter gestured to the unknown woman standing next to him. She is here today to help you girls. Help us how? Becca asked, but her voice was much quieter than normal. She's going to make you the most beautiful women on the face of the earth. The 3 women cocked their heads in confusion like little kittens. Even though your families married you off for resources, I am going to show them you are living better lives than they could even imagine. Layla and Becca's eyes widened. I am going to adorn you with the finest of jewels, silks, and gold we can find. You will be the very picture of elegance, and let those beneath you know they aren't even worth your gaze. Exeter turned to Layla and said, even your mother will not have as high quality an outfit as the 3 of you. Layla was incredibly shocked. When it came to witches, they were all very rich. But they weren't quite the richest. The treasure-hoarding dragons with long lifespans and ferocious power naturally dominated the world's economy. The vampires were second since, like dragons, they had long lifespans, but they much preferred to use their divinely beautiful appearances to charm themselves into lavish living. Surprisingly, dwarves were in third place as anything and everything that they made could be sold for a few million gold. But dwarves are picky about their clientele and they don't sell anything to witches or humans, effectively cutting down some of their potential business. Despite all that, witches were still incredibly loaded and there wasn't much they couldn't obtain through one method or another. So saying that she would be wearing items even her mother could not easily obtain, Layla didn't feel worthy. Becca wasn't much better. Her clan was never that wealthy to begin with, so even living in a castle was a huge improvement for her. Now her husband was about to spend a few billion gold on each of them? It was enough to make her head spin. Does Mira get a dress too? The little dragon had finally finished her cookie and was now looking around the room admiring the most beautiful dresses she'd ever seen. Of course, my daughter. Rudy has a selection picked out for you in the next room. Rudy bowed deeply before finally speaking. It is a pleasure to make your acquaintance, Princess Mira. If you'll follow me, I can show you what we have for you today. Okay. Just like that, Exeter was left alone in the room with his 3 wives. I don't think I deserve all of this. Becca finally said. Me neither. Lisa muttered. Layla said nothing, but it was clear she felt the same way. Exeter nodded like he was expecting this, before he stood up and walked towards the girls. He stopped just in front of them and said in a voice that contained seriousness as well as sincerity, if anyone deserves something like this, it'd be you 3. You've all lived very hard lives. Something like this is in no way intended to erase the trauma of your past, but it is a promise for the future. A promise? Layla had tears welling up in her eyes. Exeter nodded and brought his hand up to her eyes to wipe the tears that were beginning to fall. A promise that in the future things like this will be commonplace. If you can't handle things like this, then how will you handle the other things I'll give you? This earned a small chuckle from the girls and their mood lightened considerably. Layla, thank you. Becca, you're really the best husband ever. Both girls gave Exeter a kiss of thanks before Lisa stepped forward with a face full of complicated emotions. Thank you. She finally managed to say. Oh? Is that all? Don't you want to kiss him as well? Layla teased. Yeah? Lisa got flashbacks to the week before, where she found Exeter asleep in the library. She frantically looked around for help from Becca, but the hellhound was no longer paying attention and had started nibbling on the plate of cookies Mira was working on earlier. She started to say. Exeter stepped forward and planted a firm kiss on Lisa's lips. Lisa felt her brain go numb temporarily. She couldn't think, she barely remembered to breathe. All she could do was savor the first real kiss she had with her new husband. Naturally, Exeter never would have kissed her if he wasn't sure she wanted it. With his eyes allowing him to see the desire of the women around him, he could clearly see how much Lisa wanted him. This was more than enough for him to act. After they broke their kiss, Exeter was the first to speak. You are my wife too. You don't have to hide what you want from me. I hope one day you'll be comfortable enough to realize that. When he began to walk away, Lisa had a lump in her throat. Did all of that just happen? Was she dreaming? So, who's going first? Exeter asked as he sat back down on the couch. 2 days later. The castle was chaotically busy today. The guest list for the young master's party was long and frightening. Every servant assigned to work the party had been sweating since they woke up. If they made a mistake and offended one of the guests in attendance today, they could start a war. Not really, but that's how they felt anyway. The reception room for the party was decorated to a T. Tables lined with exquisite food and drink, chairs made of wood from a world tree, gold and jewel-encrusted silverware. The level of extravagance was simply overwhelming. Yara had spared no expense ensuring that her son's birthday and announcement of his health would happen in the most ideal setting possible. She was going to make this the most memorable night of her son's life. Night had already fallen and guests were just now being let in. While no one really noteworthy had yet to arrive, Yara was out in the crowd mingling and greeting guests all the same. Everyone praised her for her beauty and attention to detail in planning this party. Outwardly she was graceful and charming and full of life. Inwardly, she was anxiously awaiting the arrival of a certain someone. Ladies and gentlemen, may I please have your attention? Yara's eyes lit up when she realized the arrival of an important guest was about to be announced. She crossed her fingers, hoping that it was the one she was waiting for. It is my highest honor to introduce to you the pillars of Dragon Society, the Dragon Lords. Applause and gasps erupted throughout the hall, yet Yara had a displeased expression. Four beings walked through the entrance to the hall and everyone was immediately captivated. From the Bloodflame clan. A woman with pure white skin and hair, dressed in red and black armor, stepped forward. Lady Sarah's Bloodflame. A round of applause began for the most fearsome and famed warrior under the Dragon King. From the Blacksea clan. A man wearing blue pants, with short black hair and light blue scales, smiled and waved. Lord Lawton Blacksea. Lawton flashed a flirtatious wink at Yara that nearly made her gag, but she maintained her composure through sheer will. From the Stormcaller clan. A beautiful woman with long black hair, wearing an extremely short dress and adorned in gold, stepped forward. Lady Tiamat Stormcaller. Most of the applause came from men who were captivated by the scantily clad women. Those who had wives were thoroughly punished later on that evening. And last but certainly not least. The last of the four stepped forward and Yara frowned deeply when she realized he was not alone. From the Snowscale clan. 2 men who were almost identical with long flowing snow-white hair and pale skin with bright red eyes wore pleased expressions. Accompanied by his oldest son, Jeddah Snowscale. Jeddah paid no attention to the announcer and instead was looking around as if he was searching for something. Lord Jerai Snowscale. This time applause came from the women in the room who were extremely enchanted by this man's appearance. Those who had husbands went on about their nights as usual. Yara was trying to suppress her aura from spilling out, but she was almost shaking with rage. Exedra had an intense hatred for Jeddah due to an incident in their past as well as his treatment of Lisa and Mira, and she was not the least bit certain what would happen when he saw him. Her mood only got worse when she saw the group of 5 walking towards her. Lawton was the first to speak, much to the dismay of Yara. "You look as lovely as ever, princess." He flashed his signature grin that had captivated the hearts of many women. His harem numbered well over 1,000, and yet he was still obsessively looking for more. He had tried to woo Yara a number of times, yet she always proclaimed herself to be spoken for. That didn't stop him from trying though. It wouldn't be the first time he'd taken a woman from her husband after all. Yara put her pleasant personality back on as best she could before responding. "Thank you for the compliment, Lord Lawton." She then turned to address the entire group. "I am pleased to see you are all in good health. Thank you for joining us to celebrate today. Tiamat, thank you for inviting us. Sarah's, where's the sickly little birthday boy? Jirai, what's this big announcement you wanted to make?" Yara chuckled slightly, inadvertently causing the heart of every man and woman nearby to skip a beat. "Patience, my friends, everything will be revealed soon, but for now just try to enjoy the party." She began to walk away, but not before she brushed past Jirai and whispered in a voice that only the two of them could hear, "Keep your fucking son away from my maids." Jirai said nothing and instead looked at his son and sighed inwardly. Normally his son was never interested in this kind of thing, so why did he insist on coming tonight? The entire time they'd been here, his son hadn't stopped looking around like he was searching for someone. It's not like him to apologize, so who in the world could he be looking for? Jirai wondered, before eventually shaking his head and putting it out of his mind. As long as his son didn't cause any problems tonight, he'd let him be. Jirai rubbed his neck slightly as he remembered the fallout from the last incident his son caused. Maybe it was a mistake to bring him after all? "May I introduce to you?" Suddenly, everyone turned their gaze to the entrance to see which big shot was going to show up next. Accompanied by 2 of her daughters. The Witch Queen, Sayazanami. A tall gorgeous woman with inky black hair and translucent white eyes stepped forward. She wore no smile on her ruby red lips, yet everyone in attendance could see the mischievous glint lurking in her eyes. On both sides of her stood her twin daughters. The girls looked just like their mother, but instead of her white-colored eyes they each had the amber-colored eyes of a goat. People immediately walked over to introduce themselves and exchange pleasantries. This was the Witch Queen. If they made a favorable impression on her, they might be able to get a great discount on a magic tutor. Who in their right mind wouldn't want to take advantage of this opportunity? Yara stared at the woman briefly before turning away. This wasn't the time to avenge Layla. And besides, my son has his own plans anyway. "May I introduce to you?" Yara had given up looking at the entrance since she assumed the one she was waiting for would be fashionably late as always. The Vampire Queen, Audrina Sanguine. Yara immediately froze on her tracks and turned towards the entrance. A crowd of people had formed around the newest guest. Everyone was trying to get a peek at the only woman said to rival Princess Yara in terms of beauty. Yara wasn't too upset she couldn't see her friend immediately after a long time. Her friend's aura was unmistakable, and just knowing she was here was enough to bring a smile of genuine warmth to her face. Eventually the crowd began to shift and parted to reveal a dangerously enchanting woman. She was tall with a deliciously curvy body wrapped in warm gray skin. Her long silver hair flowed freely below her perky ass, and her bewitching violet eyes made her look seductive and dangerous. When she saw Yara, her beautiful full lips curled up into a happy smile that revealed her 2 perfect white fangs and sent a heart-shaped arrow through the hearts of all the men in the room. Their wives weren't even upset this time. They understood that this woman was divinely beautiful. Faster than the eye could see, Audrina disappeared in a cloud of black smoke before reappearing right in front of Yara and wrapping her arms around her for a hug. The sight of those wonderful melons pressing up against each other was enough to give Lawton a small nosebleed, but with a quick punch to the gut, Sarah's refocused him. "It's good to see you again too." Yara chuckled and quickly returned her hug. Audrina hummed in contemplation before dipping her hands lower and squeezing Yara's bottom. Yara's warm and motherly expression broke and a vein bulged in her forehead. "You little pervert, why do you do this every time?" Audrina finally separated from her and spoke in a refined and elegant voice, "I like to make sure mine is still the best." Yara simply rolled her eyes at this childish provocation. She'd already gotten used to it after all. Audrina and Yara spent much of their time talking about recent events before the conversation turned to Exedra. "Where's my favorite nephew?" "He's your only nephew." Just answer the question, you big-boobed monster. Yara felt herself growing a small ulcer hearing the way her friend referred to her but chose to ignore it. He'll be here soon. Though when you see him. Adrina cocked her head in confusion. What? Don't fuck him. Excuse me? Adrina was absolutely flabbergasted. Don't fuck him. Yara repeated. Adrina was slightly insulted. Did her friend truly not know her type? They were competing for the same man years ago. She should know her tastes. While she liked her sickly little nephew, she would never see him as a man. Was this some kind of joke? I would never. Just what do you take me for? Yara flashed a sneaky smile that sent chills down Adrina's spine. I'll hold you to that. What the hell is going on with her? The next guests to arrive were Becca's family, the Osa clan. Canis Osa was a stern-looking man with waist-length silver hair and wearing old armor covered with scratches from battle. Behind his back were 9 silver tails swaying rhythmically with his every step. So he evolved again, huh? Yara's thoughts were full of disdain as she stared at one of the people she hated most in all of Dola. Standing behind him were 2 of Becca's older brothers and another unknown beastkin man. Perhaps by coincidence, Queen Say had just managed to escape from her crowd of bootlickers and was making her way over to Yara at the same time as Canis. Adrina flashed an amused smile as she realized what was about to happen. Of course, if things got too heated, she'd step in and stop her friend, but for now? She wanted to watch her struggle for a bit. Say, I am pleased to see you are in good health, Yara. Canis, as am I. Canis and his sons offered a small bow since naturally their status was much lower than the 2 women present. Yara smiled faintly before proceeding to lie right through her teeth. I'm glad you both could make it. You should have died on the way here. It's wonderful to see the 2 of you again. I haven't seen you since the wedding. All I want to see are the contents of your skulls. I apologize, but running a kingdom does tend to keep one terribly busy. Say put on an apologetic expression that could fool anyone besides Yara and Adrina. Our tribe has gotten many more mercenary jobs over the years thanks to the Draven family influence, so we have been quite busy as well. Compared to Say, Canis actually seemed sincere, but Yara knew he didn't have any desire to see his daughter either. You're looking lovely as well, Adrina. Say had finally decided to acknowledge the presence of the vampire queen who had been watching this whole exchange with a bored expression. Aren't I always? Was her disinterested reply. Canis snickered while Say tried her best not to respond to such an obvious provocation. Still as unscrupulous as ever, I see. Ida D. It is my highest honor to introduce to you. The voice of the announcer interrupted what was sure to be a war of words between the 2 rulers. Yara narrowed her eyes when she heard the excited tone of the announcer and knew what was about to come next. From the Draven royal family. The first prince of Antares, Iori Draven. Thunderous applause broke out inside the ballroom. Seeing 1 member of the royal family was rare enough, but 2? These people were in complete awe. A man wearing glittering red armor that left his chest exposed was walking through the crowd. No one dared to get too close and risk this man's ire, so they simply wished him good health from a distance. He was divinely handsome with long white hair and intense red eyes. On the left side of his head was a single curved red horn. When his eyes landed on his sister, they softened a bit before he walked towards her. Everyone immediately sucked in their breath. The reason why it was almost impossible to see 2 members of the royal family together up close was because they did not get along. As far as the public knew, King Helios' 3 children hadn't spoken in years. The truth wasn't that far off. While it was true that there was a time when the royal family was in great turmoil, that was before Princess Yara went missing several years ago. After she returned, her relationship with her first brother improved, if only slightly. Whether it was the guilt of driving his sister away or the realization that it wasn't her fault that her mother was the only woman their father ever loved, who can say? They had a long chat when she returned home after being missing for several years, and fences began to be mended. Apologies were said, but that was all. They didn't become the best of friends. They still had never even hugged. The last time he saw his nephew was when he was still a baby. All that was left between them was the hope that one day they could forgive and forget. Yara needed time to heal, and Iori respected that. Dragons live extremely long lives after all. So now the oldest child and the youngest child were about to exchange words for the first time in 17 years. Yara was in inner turmoil. She wasn't even sure her brother would come when she sent the invitation, but now he was here and walking towards her. Suddenly, she felt someone grab her hand and instinctively knew that it was Adrina trying to get her to relax. When he stood in front of her, there were a few moments of uncomfortable silence. The servants working the party sighed inwardly as they were certain that a fight was going to break out between two evolved and they'd have to clean it. "You look well, sister." Iori finally spoke. Yara took a deep breath and composed herself. She wasn't a child anymore. He wasn't either. They could try to be normal siblings for once, right? "You look scary," Yara finally said. "Huh? Who wears battle armor to a birthday party?" Iori looked down at his attire and scratched his cheek slightly in embarrassment. "Ah. You know, I've always felt more comfortable in things like this." "Really, how childish." Yara scoffed, but inwardly she was enjoying this feeling of playfully mocking her brother. Seeing that the two siblings were in fact getting along, the other partygoers returned to their usual business. Canis and Adrina silently excused themselves while the servants put the brooms they had picked up back down and continued serving. "So, brother's not coming?" Yara asked after another round of uncomfortable silence. Iori sighed heavily, like he'd already expected this. "No, sorry sister, he's still dash." "It's fine," Yara interjected. "Even if he doesn't come, he'll certainly hear about it." Iori was quite perplexed that his sister had gotten over it so quickly and didn't seem to be very upset. And what did she mean he would hear about it? Does it have something to do with the announcement you're supposed to make? Instead of answering, Yara wore a shit-eating grin. "Wouldn't you like to know?" "I would, yes, that's why I asked." "Tough shit." Such unsavory language for a princess. Iori put on a fake shocked expression as if he couldn't imagine those words coming out of his sister's mouth. "Where did you learn to speak like that? Are you joking? You and brother Rekka called me bitch so much I thought it was a part of my name until I was 4. Yara frowned. Iori hurriedly turned away when he heard stories of how he used to behave in the past. "Ahem, yes, well. I'm sorry for that." The proud fire dragon had a small blush and wore an apologetic expression. Yara chuckled before she linked arms with her brother. "I know, it's fine, so let's go get a drink." Her brother immediately perked up when he heard the word drink. Dragons love alcohol almost as much as they love treasure, and because of that love they were able to routinely trade wine and ale with the dwarven continent and maintain an amicable relationship. King Helios and King in Hell are also drinking buddies. Before they could reach the bar, the voice of the announcer rang out for the final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I please have your attention? It's time," Yara said with a smile. "HM? Time for what?" Iori asked. "The answer to your question." Iori figured he wasn't going to get a clearer answer than that, so he chose to watch and wait. Accompanied by his wives and daughter. Canis/Adrina, daughter? I'm a grandmother? Canis, I'm a grandfather? Adrina, that weak little brat actually has the energy for sex? The son of the first princess of Antares, Yara Draven. Yara knew what was about to come next, but she showed no reaction. If her son hadn't asked for this, she wouldn't have obliged, but since he did, she complied. "And the demon lord of lust, Asmodeus Morningstar." What? The demons? Is that where she went all those years ago? Isn't he dead? An incubus, huh, no wonder I couldn't woo her. I don't think that's why Lawton. Naturally, the room erupted into murmurs and whispers. Iori was slightly surprised but chose not to comment on this revelation. Although he wanted to know more, he decided to let his sister tell him on her own. The fourth prince of Antares, Exedra Draven. The crowd quickly recovered from their shock due to the bomb that had just been dropped and erupted in applause. Though not as much as when Iori entered, it was still an adequate response. This man was the reason they were there after all. Step. 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 Exedra and his family finally stepped out into the room, and the room, which was filled with applause a second ago, became deadly silent. The first thing everyone noticed was an adorable little dragon girl walking proudly in front of the group that just entered. The little girl was incredibly cute and charming, wearing a fluffy little white dress with a small tiara on top of her hair that appeared to be made of solid ice and diamonds. Her face was scrunched in a serious expression that made her look unapproachable and slightly intimidating, despite being only 6 years old. Or at least that's what she believed. Ah. She's so precious. James I think we should start trying. Why aren't they afraid of me? Mira wondered but quickly tossed the thought aside as she started looking towards the dessert table to see if there were cookies available. When the focus left the little girl, everyone noticed the women walking behind her. By Ashira. Their presence is. They are so beautiful. I thought his wives were just supposed to be rejects. Those dresses. Becca, Lisa, and Layla were each wearing dresses with their backs cut out and a slit on the side that went all the way up to their hip. Each one of them also wore gold armbands, necklaces, and rings made with exquisite dwarven craftsmanship. Each ring was enchanted with a variety of buffs like increased mana regeneration and enhanced senses. Not only could they see everything going on in this party, they could hear everything as well. Even Becca had shifted her hands from her usual paws to delicate little fingers that bore a ring on each. Layla was first in line and wore a bright red dress with a golden tiara that held a bright red ruby in the middle that matched the color of her eyes perfectly. When Say saw her daughter, she was uninterested at first. Though when she saw the crown and dress that Layla wore, her uninterest quickly changed into bitter jealousy and then rage. That bitch, she's actually wearing such an outfit? It was worth noting that the crown on Layla's head alone costed more than several large cities could earn in a year. And what's with that look? It's like she doesn't even put me in her eyes anymore. Say was seething. This was the same girl who used to flinch at the mere sight of her, and now she wouldn't even glance her way. You think you're special now? You are still nothing. So what if that sniveling little man bought you a few trinkets? And then she saw Exedra. And her jealousy reached a fever pitch when she saw the most gorgeous man she could imagine. Canis wasn't doing much better when he saw his daughter. Becca wore a tight black dress that could barely contain her enormous bust. On top of Becca's head was a black metal crown in the shape of thorns. While there were no jewels on Becca's crown, it didn't take away from the feeling of wealth that now emanated from her. Canis knew he'd need 10 years of frugal living to even be able to think about buying the cheapest item his daughter wore. But that wasn't what bothered him the most. He'd given up his daughter to the dragons because she was useless and dispensable, but now she actually gained some kind of twisted sense of superiority from it? What a joke. You think because that weak little lizard gave you a few shiny items you're better than me? Canis roared internally. He'll get bored of you and you'll be right back in the dirt with the rest of us, you so. And then his gaze landed on Exedra. And he felt chills run down his spine when he felt his malevolent aura. Lisa was last in line and had the most eyes on her. She wore an incredibly intricate silver tiara that was littered with diamonds, her dress was golden colored and went perfectly with her warm amber eyes and hair. While she was undoubtedly beautiful, the few dragons in the crowd could sense that she was a lesser dragon and sneered inwardly. Beautiful trash is still trash after all. I can't believe he'd do such a thing. She's old and lesser, does he not have any taste? She'll surely sully this event with her presence. Lisa could of course hear the harsh words being thrown her way but paid them no mind. Exedra had informed all of them prior to entering that this was likely to happen, but he had a plan for it. While she wasn't sure what the plan was exactly, she trusted her husband and knew if he said he was going to do something he'd do it. She just had to make a mental note of everyone saying something unpleasant for later. Have I seen that woman somewhere before? Jirai wondered. He was staring at Lisa, trying to remember where exactly he'd seen her, but he was drawing a blank every time. He turned to ask his son, only to remember that he'd left the room some time ago. He seemed to be frustrated that he couldn't find what he was looking for and simply went outside to calm down. How'd that Bedreddin whelp land such beautiful women though? He couldn't believe it. Every woman in Exeter's harem was divinely beautiful. How'd one brat without an ounce of power get so lucky? And then Exedra came into view, and for the second time in Jirai's 2,000 years of living, his looks felt inferior compared to another man's. When Exedra stepped out in full view of the crowd, all the hushed murmurs and whispers that plagued the crowd before immediately ceased. No one had ever seen a man that fit the definition of perfect to such a degree before. Wearing a red robe with black pants and his signature sandals, as well as a ceremonial golden necklace and weapon disguised as an earring, Exedra hadn't deviated much from his usual attire to the dismay of Duke. But no one could focus on the clothes he wore. Not when this man's appearance was so utterly enchanting. His long blood-red hair was tied up in a ponytail, with 2 loose strands of hair falling in either side of his face. The body underneath his clothes was not only incredibly well-defined, but it was covered in intricate black tattoos that no one recognized. He was walking forward with his eyes closed, yet he never made a misstep. Unbeknownst to them, Exedra was using soul sense along with his natural perception as an incubus to see the entire room. He could see everything and everyone without his eyes even being open. He could see their feelings as well. Red auras were surrounding Becca and Layla's parents and a few of the noble dragons. Most of the women in the room either had green auras for jealousy or the standard purple for an intense desire. Skill, soul sense has leveled up. Exeter finally opened his eyes when he heard the message from the system, and several gasps were heard once again. While his daughter's eyes were almost the same, they lacked the vibrant luster and the bitter coldness that her father's had. This dangerous contrast between something you can't look away from and something you should look away from thoroughly entranced the hearts and minds of everyone present. Most women became wet immediately and made up in their minds they would try to seduce this young man by any means necessary tonight. One was more determined than others. That bitch. She knew this would happen, that's why she told me that. Audrina was in a difficult position. She wanted to be a good friend and keep her word, but not only was this man divinely handsome, but there was another deeper force that seemed to want her to obey this man's every whim and want. She'd been tricked, damn it. That's why that woman was so giggly earlier. While she could feel her emotions were being influenced just from the sight of him, she couldn't do anything about it. She was under a spell she had no desire to break out from. She hurriedly folded her arms across her chest and covered her breasts when she realized her nipples had gotten hard without her realizing it. The group came to a stop directly in front of Yara and Iori. They bowed slightly to Iori before offering Yara warm smiles. You all look perfect. Yara couldn't stop a single tear from falling from her eye. Lisa, thank you, mother. Becca, you as well, mother. Layla, our beauty is still far below your own. Mira, don't cry, grandmother, do you want a cookie too? Yara chuckled before she walked towards her son and lightly touched his face. My boy is a man now. I couldn't be prouder. For the first time in a while, Exedra smiled a warm smile that was only for his family to see. The 3 women fell in love all over again when they saw the man who had become harder to read recently displaying such an emotion. The few in the crowd who didn't believe that was really Exedra were now fully convinced, and the murmurs resumed with an unseen intensity. Is that really him? I thought he was supposed to be bedridden? How can someone change so much? Yara naturally heard the murmurs and walked toward the group of confused partygoers. May I have your attention, please? Yara didn't yell or scream, yet everyone immediately ceased their conversations and listened. I told you all on the invitations that I had an announcement to make. She began. But first, let me tell you a little story. I don't believe it. A true hybrid, the first of his kind as well. A demonic dragon. We haven't seen anything like this since Lady Sarah's was born. Are we in an alliance with the demons now? Yara had just divulged the entirety of Exedra's life. From her sudden disappearance, to her meeting the love of her life and Exedra's birth. To put the icing on the cake, she even explained why he was sick for the first 17 years of his life. The gazes of everyone present looked at Yara and Exedra with pity. Especially Yara. The way she spoke about her deceased husband, it was easy for everyone to discern how much she loved him. Whilst Exedra noticed the pitying gazes from the crowd, he wasn't moved by them in the slightest. His reasoning for asking his mother to reveal the truth was not something so simple or useless as being understood. But that would only be something that was known much later. Then, how was such an illness cured? Tiamat asked the question that was burning in the minds of everyone present. Yara took a deep breath. This was the part of the plan she was sure would be the hardest. My son was cured by Ashira herself. Impossible. What do you mean, princess? The people were naturally in utter disbelief, and it was hard to blame them. In Dola's million-year history, not once has anyone had any contact with Ashira outside of an evolution, and even then she never said anything about herself or answered any questions. Yara then went on to explain how Exeter fell ill for 2 whole days, before waking up one morning in his current body. Yara overestimated the difficulty of convincing the masses of the circumstances behind Exeter's cure. While some were dubious, most took one look at Exidra's face and body and immediately believed it was crafted by their mother goddess herself. Little did they know that his looks were simply the result of having criminally gorgeous parents. The dragon lords frowned and looked at Exidra, but he didn't even spare them a gaze. He was much too focused on culling certain weeds from his garden. The Draven family is truly blessed. Indeed. Cheers for another 1,000,000 years of prosperity for our great kingdom. Cheers. News of these revelations would travel far and wide across the globe. By this time next week, every living and unliving soul in Dolo would have heard the tale of the crippled prince of the Dragon Kingdom and his miraculous cure. Exactly as he intended. Once everyone resumed drinking and the lively atmosphere was back, it was time to present gifts. Exidra sat at a large table, surrounded by his wives, with his daughter in his lap. The first to present a gift was Say. A gift for my wonderful son-in-law. She said with a smile that was warm and motherly. Despite that, her mind was filled with impure thoughts as she handed him a thick old spell book. That's a ancient grade magic. It's easily worth millions of gold. So generous. She's such a kind mother-in-law. The crowd was immediately shocked to see the first gift of the night be something of such an extravagant nature. That is the ancient grade spell for teleportation magic. She explained. It normally would take you a year or two to learn, but I am willing to be your personal tutor and cut that time in half. Say took one look at Exidra and knew that she had to have him. Originally, she'd brought this gift to humiliate her weak son-in-law since he would never be able to learn it and her slow daughter that would never be able to teach him. Her new plan was to gift Exidra the book and then offer her services as a tutor so she could take the time to seduce him. When she looked at Lisa, it was obvious he liked older women, so Say was sure she could use her charms to get him into bed. She's offering to tutor him personally? My stars, what a lucky man. Exidra opened the book and a brief uncomfortable look crossed his face. I knew it. He probably can't even begin to understand those spells. Don't worry, my future husband. I'll be sure to teach you thoroughly. Exidra closed the book and spoke for the first time all night. I've learned the spell. I don't need any tutoring. Say was so captivated by his voice entering her ears that she didn't even hear what he said at first. When her brain finally made the connection, she burst into a fit of laughter. Please don't joke, my son-in-law. There's no way you could learn a spell this complicated instantly. The young prince has a sense of humor. Fits of laughter rang out among the guests. Exidra sighed deeply. So these people can't believe the truth even when they hear it, huh? Under the stupefied gazes of all present, Exidra's body became wrapped in black and red energy before he disappeared with his daughter still in his lap. He wasn't joking? I didn't even hear a chant. The only ones who were unsurprised by this development were Exidra's wives and mother. No more than 10 seconds passed before shadows rose up and took the form of Exidra and Mira, only now Mira was holding a plate of cookies from the kitchen. Say was completely caught off guard, but as a queen she'd never show it. My Layla, what a talented husband you have. She finally addressed her daughter for the first time in years. Layla was seated next to Exidra and stared at her mother with a disinterested gaze that carried no disdain or animosity. Indeed I do. Layla finally showed a small smile before she leaned over and gave Exidra a deep kiss. Gross. Mira cried with cookie crumbs all over her mouth. Internally, Say was fuming. Realizing her plan had failed, she instead wished Exidra a happy birthday before quickly walking away with clenched fists. That spell he used, it's different from the one in the book. Did he alter it somehow? Say contemplated this and many things as she headed directly for the bar. Layla chuckled internally and was filled with a sense of pride when she saw her mother's state. It wasn't a huge victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. Canis was next to give a gift and gave him a spear with a bronze tip. Originally, Canis was planning to humiliate him just like Say, but changed his mind entirely when he felt his aura. Even though he was a 3rd level evolved, he didn't want to offend this young man in front of him. A warrior's instincts were nothing to sneeze at and his were especially sharp for years of harsh living. The young dragon was so eerily calm that it made the hair on his tail stand up. Exidra accepted the gift with a disinterested nod and Canis hurriedly left his sight. He didn't even glance at his daughter, but one among his group did. The gift-giving continued for some time. Exidra was given just about everything from jewels to weapons and even potions. His uncle Iori had even gifted him a katana that was quite similar to his own. Like Sei, he offered to teach him how to use it but was incredibly shocked when Exedra stood up and began executing near-flawless moves. Just what kind of monster did you give birth to? Iori wore a permanently surprised face that was shared by many of the guests. Instead of responding, Yara simply laughed it off as if it were a good joke, but Iori was terribly serious. Wasn't he just cured last week? How can he use a sword that easily? The last to present a gift was Audrina, and she looked different. While she was always naturally charming, she was now radiating an aura of seduction that could arouse even the dead. You bitch, you couldn't even keep your promise for one night? Yara sneered inwardly as she looked at her friend's state. She was eyeing her son like a ravenous beast, and his wives certainly noticed. While every woman had been looking at Exedra that way tonight, this one felt the most like a threat. Lisa and Mira were the most tame. One didn't understand all the looks her father was getting, and the other didn't feel like it would be her place to be upset. On the other hand, Layla and Becca were both ready to cause an international incident. Lisa. Suddenly, a hate-filled roar came from the entrance, and everyone looked to see a young ice dragon trembling with rage. Exedra's eyes immediately became cold and lifeless when he heard someone refer to his wife in such a casual nature. When Jirai realized something terrible was about to happen, his blood immediately ran cold. You idiot, what are you doing?